Hey guys, welcome back to channel. What if Naruto was the Guildmaster of Overlord? Movie 1. A man covered in full plate armor stood above a young woman and her little sister, sword arm raised high. His blade gleamed in the sunlight, poised to end both of their lives in one swift blow. The young woman felt her eyes burn with tears and bitter lip. Hugging her little sister closer, both girls squeezed their eyes shut, bracing for impact. They didn't ask for this. Their little shire was naught but a humble collection of farms and workshops. They didn't even have an inn, let alone something of value. Why would anyone go so far out of their way to attack them? If only she'd been stronger, if only they had a way to repel these invaders, but she wasn't, and they didn't. As if just to make matters worse, the man brought a friend with him. Even if she was able to overpower one by some miracle, she'd still be cut down, and with the gash in her back, she and her sister had nowhere to run. Thus, all she could do was sit here and die. Seconds, moments, what felt like minutes passed, and for some reason, she wasn't dead yet. Surely the man had had more than enough time to finish her off by now, and why did she hear the rattling of metal? The young woman hesitantly gingerly looked up to see that the man and his comrade were trembling, swords now held in a defensive stance behind their shields, backing away from them. Following their gaze, the young woman saw only despair. That was all she could describe this thing as. What they gazed upon was an unholy darkness which had torn a hole within reality itself, paper thin, and yet unfathomably deep. The swirling darkness took on the form of a half-oval, protruding from the earth, as if it had been spat out by the pits of hell. They had no idea what it was, but merely gazing upon it filled them with an instinctive dread. Then, something stepped through it, as if emerging from a shadowy hallway. His glowing crimson eyes were the first thing they saw, his pupils slit like some kind of beast. He was humanoid, or appeared to be, but even when all they could see was his face, they knew that there was something off about him. He stepped forth and 9 fox-like tails fanned out behind him. His hair and fur were deep blood red, his garb was alien to them, but bore a sense of prestige, like the garments of a foreign lord from a faraway land. 2 vulpines rested atop his head, long crimson locks with black tips spilled out upon his shoulders. His blackened lips curled back in a hungry snarl to bare his fangs, and claw-like nails tipped his fingers. In one hand, he held a magic, golden staff of some kind, one that inspired both dread and awe in equal measure, a divine weapon seemingly forged by the gods of hell themselves. In the other, he held a black sword, seemingly made of shadow. Like the staff, it seemed both divine and unholy, yet not as powerful. But even that felt like comparing a basilisk to a dragon. Neither beast nor man, this being made them all tremble before him. Something deep, something primal within the woman and her would-be assailants told them that he was dangerous. The young woman clutched her sister close as he approached, but the being ignored her. She felt overwhelmed, like his presence alone was choking her to death, but as soon as that sensation came, it went and she could breathe again. The same, however, could not be said for the soldiers. There was a panicked cry as one of them lunged at him and then, nothing. The woman dared to look and immediately regretted it. All that remained of the men was a pair of red stains upon the ground, their mangled armor now completely unrecognizable. She knew not how he did it, nor did she want to, and then, he turned his attention to her and, in the year 2138 AD, there existed a new frontier of gaming, the MMORPG. That acronym stood for Dive Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. Such video games were played through connecting their consoles directly to one's brain through the intracerebral nano-computer network, a fusion of man and machine which had long since become commonplace in the world by now. Through this method, these games allowed players to enter a virtual world and experience it as though it were real life to an extent. They had their limits like any other technology, but compared to the consoles of old, and now dethroned PC master race, these shortcomings were laughably paltry. It was quite the healthy industry, too, despite the sad debacle of last century. Time heals all wounds, as they say, especially when people eventually catch up to the technology thereof. And among the abundance of MMORPGs was one by the name of Yggdrasil. The game in question had been painstakingly developed and released in the year 2126. Its major selling point was player freedom. There were over 2,000 basic and advanced job classes and 700 racial classes, in addition to that. The highest maximum any one class had was 15 levels and with a level cap, so in order to attain the level cap of 100, one needed to take on at least 7 classes. On one hand, a player could feasibly take one level in each of 100 classes if they so chose, assuming they met the requirements, of course. But on the other, anyone who wanted to take on a specific class fantasy could do so as well, thanks to the abundance of similar and synergistic classes at their disposal. Also, various creation tools, some sold separately, could be used to customize one's characters to an unprecedented level. Weapons, armor, other cosmetic settings, and even flavor texts were all fair game. In addition to all of that, Yggdrasil boasted no less than 9 whole worlds for players to explore. Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. These features combined to ignite the creative spirits of its Japanese players, sparking what could only be described as an artistic revolution. The game became so popular that Yggdrasil became a household name. But now that was all in the past. A gigantic round table, carved from a single, solid chunk of black marble, sat in the center of a large chamber, surrounded by 41 luxurious chairs. But most of those seats were now empty. Once upon a time, every single spot had been claimed, but now only 3 were filled. One of the seated beings was garbed in magnificent wizard's robes, of black, violet, and gold. The high collar and exaggerated spoulders seemed excessive, but they somehow fit with the rest of his attire. The exposed head, however, was a bare skull. Red pinpoints of light glowed in its otherwise empty sockets, a halo of black radiance filling out the rest. This was the Overlord, Momonga, a magic caster of the highest rank who became undead to learn the most potent of spells. Another being in the room was what looked like a living mass of tar. Its liquid form writhed and churned constantly, never retaining the same form for more than a second. This one's name was Hero, an elder black ooze, the most corrosive of all slimes. Finally, the last among them was the most humanoid in appearance, but in truth, he was farther from being human than even the walking mass of goop. He was garbed in regal, eastern robes of black, white, and orange, lightly armored and sporting a metal-plated headband with curved decorative ox-like horns. He had crimson eyes with slit pupils, blood-red hair that faded to black at the ends, and whisker-like markings on either cheek, matching the birthmarks he had early. Vulpine ears sat atop his head, and he sported 9 fox-like tails. The fur on each was as red as his hair, and the tips similarly faded to black. This beast-man was Kurama, and he was a Yako, a species of fox demon, most well known for their talents in trickery, illusions, and fire magic. Despite their outward appearance, however, these creatures were actually players. In Yggdrasil, players could choose their races from 3 broad groups: humanoid, demi-human, and heteromorph. Humanoids were the most basic player type, encompassing humans, dwarves, elves, and the like. Demi-humans were generally uglier, but with better physical stats, which included goblins, ogres, and actual beastmen like centaurs, satyrs, and leonin among others. Finally, there were the heteromorphic races, were generally more powerful all around, but came with massive drawbacks, not the least of which being that one needed to sacrifice at least 1 level, in order to play a heteromorph, a level that could very well be more useful elsewhere, if you don't know what you're doing. Granted, demi-humans had the same drawback, but they were also allowed far more freedoms and came with less drawbacks overall. Naturally, all 3 of these players were heteromorphs. As Momonga spoke, his jaws did not move. Even the most advanced game of its time, one that literally plugged itself into the player's brain, still couldn't quite yet fully replicate speech and emotions in its player models. It was quite the hurdle to overcome, but several developers were undoubtedly taking a respectable crack at it. "It's been some time, Hero-san," he said. "I didn't expect you to come." "Same here," Kurama chimed in, his face also unmoving. A digital word bubble then appeared above his head with a smiley face in it. Another word bubble appeared above Hero's head, this one featuring a more sheepish grin. "Indeed it has," he sighed reminiscently. 2 years or so. "But still, you couldn't pay me to miss out on seeing you 2 one last time." Then, he turned what could be passed for a head towards the foxman. "I love what you've done with the place, by the way. If only our friends could see this too one last time." Now it was Kurama's turn to use the sheepish grin emote. "I had a lot of help," he said, turning indicatively towards Momonga. "Only when I had time off from my new job," the skeletal man replied with warm chuckle. "Too. That only started a month ago," Kurama pointed out, leaning forward and over the table. "Has it now?" Momonga chuckled again. "It feels like it's been ages." Kurama was right, though, before then, the 2 of them were quite the dynamic duo when it came to maintaining their guild base. "Can't say I blame you, senpai," Kurama said with a hearty chuckle of his own. "My work's been pretty hellish too, with the new guy being a constant thorn in my ass, but it can't be helped." Preaching to the choir, Kurama-san, Hero told him, his voice laced with dry amusement. "I'm starting to feel how I like kingdom." And from there, the 3 of them shared their respective horror stories of the workplace. They all laughed and ate for literal hours on end. But, alas, they couldn't be here forever. "This is the most fun I've had in a long time," Hero said with a tired chortle. "How long has it been since he was this happy? I wish I could stay longer, but I need to get up early." "I hear ya," Kurama told him, a smiley face emoji above his head once more. "Time really does fly when you're having fun. Take care, Hero-san." With that and one last chuckle, a black tendril lashed about as the elder black ooze opened up his interface. "Maybe we can meet up real sometime," he said. "Have a good night, you two." Then, he went still and vanished soon after in a burst of pixels. When it was just the 2 of them, a comfortable silence washed over Momonga and Kurama. In the end it was broken by the former. "We should give the place one last tour," he suggested. "For old time's sake." "Definitely." Kurama beamed at the thought. 2 hours after they left, Momonga and Kurama were back in the meeting room, standing before a mighty staff floating within its little nook in the wall. The guild hall, the great tomb of Nazarick, was once a 6th-floor dungeon. But, after having claimed it as their own, it was now a 10-floor dungeon with 7 unique themes spread out between those very same levels. The first 3 floors, collectively known as the catacombs, were modeled after an actual tomb. The 4th floor was an underground lake, the 5th, a massive glacier, the 6th, a rainforest. The 7th was a molten hellscape, the 8th was a massive wasteland, and finally, the 9th and 10th floors were the realm of the gods, in other words, the home base of the Guild Einzulgaun. One would think they were just tooting their own horn by calling it that, but at the same time, many a player would admit that they earned the bragging rights, as Einzulgaun, ranked among the top 10 guilds in Yggdrasil, with several world firsts under their collective belt, Nazarick only being the most obvious and countless top rankings in PvP. Currently, they were on the 8th floor, having taken this damn long to get back here, and it was starting to show from among her. It was quite weird and very out of character to see a skeleton stretch and yawn. The fact that his jaw didn't move only made it worse. Getting tired, senpai? Kurama asked. Yes, it would seem that I'm at my limit, Momonga sighed dejectedly. Sorry I couldn't stay with you until the end. Kurama wanted to say something, but hesitated. It's fine, he said. You should get some sleep. The skeletal player nodded, but before he logged out, he wanted to say something. I cannot express how grateful I am that you stuck with us until the end, Naruto, he told Kurama, referring to him by his real name. Everyone in the guild knew it by now, and several of its former members still kept up with him on social media. Well, I am the Guildmaster, the whisker-marked man replied. And you guys are the only family I've ever had. It was the least I could do. I wish I could do more for this family of ours, Momonga lamented, starting to wobble as he eyeballed the guild roster on his interface. Out of the 41 former members, only 6 still remained, everyone else had long since quit the game. So do I, Kurama added. We should definitely meet up sometime. I'm sure R-rantel would love to see you again. Definitely. The fox man let out a nostalgic chuckle at the thought. Oh, the conversations we had. Kurama didn't know why, but that damn pervert was so fun to talk to given the Yaoko's usually low tolerance for people who act in such a way. It was quite weird that they got along, but they did. Quite well, in fact, and it was primarily because of R-rantel that Naruto had as diverse a game in manga collection Earl. Ahem. Not that he was willing to admit it, of course. Setting those thoughts aside, Kurama looked at Momonga once more. It's been fun, Satoru-senpai. That it has, the skeleton said. That it has. And with that, he logged out. Kurama sighed, the player behind the fox demon now left to his own devices. No one else had logged in tonight, and the servers would shut down once and for all in only 30 minutes, so he wasn't confident that they'd show. Such a shame. Izumaki Naruto was not exaggerating when he said that Einzulgaun was the only family he's ever had. Raised in an orphanage and having been an outcast since the day he was born, the young man never knew what it was like to have a family, to be accepted, to actually fit in, until he joined the Guild 9's own goal a few days before they changed their name. Eventually, he even became their guildmaster, as a reward for his diligence and dedication. Since then, Momonga was his right-hand man, teaching him all he needed to know while serving as a moderator. And now, with even him gone, Naruto realized how lonely it was. 3. I really am the only one left. Those 6 others were still registered as members, most of whom were part of Einzulgaun for longer than even him. They were not returning to this game. And even if they did, it was going to shut down. Damn it. Kurama slammed his fist against a nearby wall in frustration. The game registered it as an attack. The algorithm immediately started calculating his stats against the wall's damage resistances, and a little 0 popped up above his fist. This is the great tomb of Nazarick. The home we built for ourselves after all those hours of blood, sweat and tears. How could you all abandon it like that? Kurama seethed and then sighed, taking a moment to calm down. No, I shouldn't be mad at them. He knew they didn't quit because they wanted to. Every last one of them, even Momonga, was simply forced to choose between real life and this collective power fantasy of theirs. Gazing upon the staff, a little sad smile emoji popped up above his head. 7 serpents twisted and twined around the body of the staff itself in a wicked twisted shape, one of them curving outwards from the rest to form a knucklebow. At one end, their heads formed a perfect circle, mouths agape in agony. Each one held within its maw a gemstone of a different color. The grip was of exquisite crystal, and the body was of purest gold. This was no ordinary staff, but the staff of Einzulgaun, their literal guild weapon, unique to them. It was the literal symbol of their guild, providing its user with administrative powers over the great tomb of Nazarick and denizens thereof. It was also the biggest weakness of all guilds in Yggdrasil. If a guild weapon were ever to be destroyed, the guild would be disbanded, which was precisely why Kurama and the others kept theirs here, in this sealed-off chamber, unless and until they needed it. For, granted, he technically didn't need the staff right now, but it would feel weird if he never held such an important item in these last moments of the game. With that thought in mind, Kurama, the effective last member of Einzulgaun, reached out and grasped the weapon of his guild. I should probably get dressed for the occasion while I'm at it, he told himself. Then, Kurama opened up the player console and equipped himself with his top gear. In Yggdrasil, there were 9 ranks of gear. Low class, mid class, high class, and top class were initially the only ones, but when a few expansions came out, legacy class, relic class, legendary class, and divine class were added in that order. Technically divine class was the strongest, since the highest tier, which was the strongest since the start of the game, world class, only included certain magic items, like the Throne of Kings, which had allowed them to claim the dungeon as their guild hall. Only 200 such items existed in the game, and they were all unique. The Staff of Ainzulgown was a divine class item, thanks to the 1,500 combined hours they'd all collectively and painstakingly put into upgrading it. So, Naruto equipped his character with items of similar rank and grandeur. His robes, belt and leggings were swapped out first, replaced by a regal black, white and burnt orange guy with a swirly fire motif, leggings in the form of black hakama, a white rope serving as his belt, and a tiger pelt, these items granting him with a massive buff to his agility, HP, and resistance. The headband he now wore was identical in form, but not function, to the prior one being a more powerful item with more substantial buffs to agility, MP, and magic attack. As a set, these 4 items, the chest piece, headpiece, belt, and leggings, were known as the regalia of Shuten Daoji. Of course, the headpiece was originally a horn demon mask, and the attire was of a different color scheme, but Naruto had them changed with the in-game customization features. These changes were purely aesthetic, but they were more in line with his personal preferences. Meanwhile, his boots gave him another buff to agility, and came in the form of matching greaves, tabi and zari. They also lowered the chances of movement-based debuffs and the like from affecting him. This included spells. Meanwhile, his gloves were Eastern-style gauntlets that granted agility and magic attack, his new pauldrons being part of the same item, and to go with all of that, he wore a medallion and 9 rings with various magic effects. Finally, upon his belt was his primary weapon, a one-handed sword named Wrath of Jigoku, which dealt fire and shadow damage, while allowing him to use agility, instead of his literally non-existent physical attack stat, while it was equipped, even when he wasn't actually using it at the time. The sword also had some rather nasty on-hit effects for when he was using it, weakening the target's physical attack and physical defense, and even having a 10% chance to stun. To make matters worse, it would punish players who like to hoard things on their person by adding additional penalties to movement, agility, and physical attack based on how many they were carrying in their inventory at the time. Once everything was equipped to him, a circular, black, white, and orange symbol featuring a flaming skull formed beneath his feet to indicate that his aura of primal fear had been activated before disappearing. This buff was the one of 2 set bonuses he got from wearing the regalia of Shuten Daoji in its entirety, the other being immunity to all poison save for alcohol. In fact, the effects of any and all alcoholic beverages he consumed in-game would last for twice as long. As for the aura itself, it was quite a nasty thing for a roguelike character to have, passively reducing accuracy and physical defense of enemies within melee range, while increasing his chance to stun those affected. Of course, it didn't work on heteromorphs or dragons, among other things, but still. 5. A smiley face emoji popped up above Kurama's head. Damn, it felt good to be back in this. And with that done, he left the chamber, disappearing in a poof of smoke. Shortly thereafter, on the 9th floor, the sound of his footsteps and tapping of his staff echoed throughout a massive white chamber. The whole floor was like a palace made of alabaster, decorated with all manner of paintings, trophies, and sculptures. He saw a busty woman in the distance, around 5'6", with long golden locks and vibrant pink eyes. Naruto recognized her as one of the 41 maids created by Whitebrim. One of the perks to having a guild hall was that it allowed players to create their own NPCs, and after deciding that they needed servants to maintain the Great Tomb while they were farming and raiding and such, said member did so with a smile on his face. It was quite the fond memory, in fact. The usual limit was 700 levels distributed between the NPC, meaning you could have 7 level 100 NPCs, 700 level 1 NPCs, or anything in between. But, as was usually the case with anything, Ainzulgown went all out and did everything they reasonably could to increase that limitation, resulting in well over 3,000 levels between their countless NPCs. And with Whitebrim being a mangaka who had recently broken into the industry at the time, he was more than happy to use this function as a creative outlet. Spouting shit like maid uniforms are their secret weapons, and maids are justice all the way. He meticulously designed each and every last one of those 41 maids, with every ounce of love and care he could muster. Everyone in the guild had to admit that the end result was quite impressive. Ah, Whitebrim-san, Kurama muttered with a fond chuckle. You lovable goof. He didn't do all of the work though. The maids' routines were all programmed by Haro and 5 others, for example. But the bulk of it was certainly his doing. Smiling and nodding at the maid as she bowed to him, Kurama said, "Thank you for your work." The man behind the fox knew she would not respond as she wasn't programmed to do so, but he simply couldn't bring himself to ignore her. She was one of Whitebrim's babies, after all. Thanking her felt like the least he could do. With that done, Kurama carried on down the hall and turned towards a large pair of doors to his right. It was a rather basic misdirection. The hallway was designed to lead up to an elaborate doorway that looked far more important, but in truth, the teleportation circle in the chamber beyond only led to a maze of traps and monsters with no way out. Meanwhile, this doorway, while fairly large, looked far less important by comparison. All of the others before and after it, including the one across the hall, were identical and led to dozens of sleeping quarters. Some were made for guild members, but the rest were purely cosmetic, created to give Whitebrim's maids and various other servants of Nazarick a place to sleep. Of course, the NPCs never actually used them, but it's the thought that counts, and lacking them would drive the repairs in the guild insane. Past the doorway before Kurama, however, was a massive staircase, wide enough for 10 men, arms outstretched, to walk side by side without issue. The stairs appeared to be of white marble, partially covered by a luxurious red carpet. He descended the stairs and entered the 10th and final floor, soon finding himself in a massive entrance chamber with 7 more NPCs. The first was a distinguished old gentleman in a butler's uniform. His short combed back hair was pure white, and he had a matching, neatly trimmed full beard. Naruto immediately recognized him as Sebas, an NPC created by Touch Me, one of the founding members of Ainzulgaon. Seeing the man now gave Naruto flashbacks of how he was saved by said player from a group of assholes who were camping him at the time. That was just before Naruto himself had joined the guild. The other 6 NPCs were all female, dressed as maids, but very different from the one before. Unlike the 41 maids created by Whitebrim, these girls were decked out in armor, each one sporting a different weapon. Of course, he was the one who suggested that they be dressed as maids, but that was where his influence on their designs ended. These girls were known as the Pleiades Battle Maids, Nazarick's last line of defense. Another smiley face emoji popped up above Kurama's head as he approached the NPCs. "Follow me," he said, heading to the other side of the entry chamber. The NPCs all did as commanded. As for the chamber itself, it was officially called the Lemmichten, after an ancient home that served as the lesser key of Solomon. It was Albedo Nodel's idea, said Goofball, being the biggest edgelord of their guild. "Since they made it all the way here, we should welcome them," he said when pitching his idea to the guild. "Let others slander us as they will, but we shall welcome them proudly and openly like the magnanimous lords we are." Ainzulgaon took a vote, and then they proceeded to do just that, and this chamber was quite the welcome indeed. It was a massive dome-shaped hall. 4 colored lamps glittered from the ceiling above, and 72 niches lined the sides of the room, each one containing a demonic statue. 6. The statues were golems made of extremely rare and valuable alloys, each one modeled after a demon described in the Lemmichten. The lamps, meanwhile, were a type of monster that spit out powerful elementals when an enemy player entered their aggro radius. If the lamps alone attacked as one, they could easily defeat 2 teams of 100 max level players. Combined with the golems, this chamber served as one last due to any invaders who dared to raid their base, giving any surviving guild members more time to prepare for their final stand. 7. As for the doors on the other end, they were nearly 20 feet tall. On one side, a beautiful goddess of Yggdrasil's lore was etched into it. On the other lay a demon lord who served as her nemesis. He opened the door and basked in the glory of Nazarick's throne room. The room itself was no less than 10 times the size of the Lemmichten, well over 600 feet in length with a vaulted ceiling, and lined with dozens of red chandeliers. The mighty chamber appeared to be made entirely of black marble and obsidian. A mighty throne sat upon a pedestal, 10 steps high, at the other end. The magic throne appeared to be carved from a single piece of dark crystal, its back high enough to reach the ceiling, and hanging from it was a red banner proudly featuring the symbol of the guild. The center of the room was covered in a silver and gold carpet, leading up to the throne, and lining the walls on poles sunk into them, hung 41 flags of black and red. Each one bore the personal symbol of a guild member. As he approached the throne, Kurama's gaze was drawn to a woman beside it. She was an absolute beauty with skin of alabaster, long raven hair, and vibrant golden eyes with slit pupils. Though her gentle smile was that of a goddess, the white horns protruding crookedly from the sides of her head suggested that she was anything but. She wore a lovely white shoulderless dress which showed off her hips, white gloves, and a golden spiderweb necklace that covered her shoulders and chest. From her waist sprouted 2 black feathered wings which she held at her hips like a skirt. The woman was Albedo, one of Tabula Smeridina's most prized creations. Kurama took a seat on the throne and commanded Sebas and the Pleiades to bow before him. They all took a knee. Then, he turned to Albedo. In truth, Naruto had never paid her much mind, which made him feel rather guilty now. Upon seeing that he had 5 more minutes to go before the servers shut down, though, he decided to change that. Using the staff to open up her interface, Naruto quickly read her bio. He let out a low whistle. Though he knew that Tabula had built her to be a tank, he would have never imagined that she'd be this potent. Credit where it's due, Kurama thought aloud. That's a hell of a build. Then, Naruto read her flavor text, mostly just for the shits and giggles. As it turned out, she was written to be a diligent worker and overseer of Nazarick, second only to the members of the guild in rank. It was interesting to read. But then, at the very end, he found a line that just seemed terribly out of place. She also happens to be a slut. Kurama flinched at that, though she was a succubus, the way it had been written was just such an abrupt shift in tone. Then again, a lot of the members were into Gapmo, even Tabula, so it came as no surprise that he'd add such a thing to her bio. Tabula, you weirdo, Kurama muttered with a warm chuckle. Then, feeling impish, he decided one last act of mischief was in order. He'd never abused his administrative powers before, despite how much he wanted to on countless occasions, but with the servers shutting down in less than 5 minutes, he decided that it was now or never. The hologram of a keyboard appeared before him at his command, and Naruto deleted the words as slut from her flavor text, before replacing them with something else. She also happens to be madly in love with Kurama. 8. With a chuckle, he dismissed the keyboard and sat back in his throne. Amidst this all of this, Kurama let out a satisfied yet melancholy sigh, as the last few seconds ticked away. The servers will be shutting down, a disembodied feminine voice declared. And then, nothing changed. Uzumaki Naruto blinked in confusion as he found himself still sitting in that very same throne. What happened? Did the server fail to shut down? How that was weird, he mused aloud, not noticing the NPCs' apostrophe reactions to his comment. The server shutting down should have forced me to log out. It was definitely past midnight, this had to be a system error, right? Albedo and Sebas looked at their lord oddly, having no earthly idea of what he was talking about, but remained silent for now. It wasn't their place to interrupt a supreme being in its thoughts. What happened? Naruto frowned in concern and confusion. With a deliberate wave of his hand, he pulled up his UI to see if there were any updates in the world chat, but it didn't appear. The interface was completely gone. Panicking slightly, he tried everything he could think of. Force logout, calling a GM, sending a message, but nothing worked and his paranoia only grew with each and every failed attempt. And then, is something wrong, Millard? Naruto jumped slightly at the silky, feminine voice calling out to him. He looked at Albedo to see her fraught with concern. And all the young man could do was stare. Karn Village. Named after Karn the Explorer, this settlement was located on the border of the Riesti's kingdom in Baharth Empire, near the southern tip of the Azalrija mountain range, just outside the Great Forest of Top. Despite its name, the village was but a quaint little shire with a population of 120, among 25 families. Time seemed to stand still for her people. The only visitors they ever got were tax collectors, save for the occasional specialist who wanted to buy some herbs every once in a blue moon. That said, they made their living off the land. If it's on the table, then someone in the household either killed it, grew it, or both. Given that no one in the village could use magic, the continual light spell found in most cities was a luxury they simply did not have, so those within rose with the sun and worked till dusk. And when Emmett woke up extra early, the first thing she did was collect some water from the nearby well. Upon reaching it, she rolled up her sleeves, revealing the untanned skin of her upper arms. The lighter tones stood out in stark contrast. One could also see a hint of muscle on her, as 16 years of farm life ensured that she'd be anything but a frail maiden. Then, she heaved the filled buckets up with a YOSH, and scurried back home to fill the water tank. It would take 3 trips for her to finish, but she didn't mind too much. If the buckets were bigger, I'd finish in 2 trips, she muttered to herself. But, these are the biggest ones we have, then again, would I even be able to lift them if they were bigger? She wasn't sure. Setting those thoughts aside, Annie carried on, humming a merry tune, but then, something gave her pause. Was that a scream? Then, the sound of wood splintering filled her ears, and a sense of dread started to sink in. Dropping her buckets, the chore forgotten, she bolted towards her family's hut. She nearly tripped over her long skirt in her panic, but managed to stumble back into a full sprint. Another scream filled the air, this one coming from the direction of her home, and that dread only filled her more. The din of battle rang across Karn village as men in armor bearing the sigil of the Baharth Empire burned and pillaged with sadistic glee. Anna yelped as a dead man fell at her feet from a stab to the chest. Her eyes burned at the sight. "And Mr. Morga," she whispered, fleeing as the man's killer entered his house. There were no strangers in a village this small. Mr. Morga had done nothing in his life to deserve such a gruesome fate. With a sob, Annie kept running until she reached her own house. Mom. Dad. Nemu. In her panic, the young woman slammed the door open as she called out for her family. Oh, thank the gods. Henry's mother sighed with relief, embracing her eldest daughter. Nemu, meanwhile, ran up to her big sister, rolling her eyes out. Then, their father spoke up, urging them to turn towards the door so they could run. We need to get shit. But, before they had a chance, a man in armor blocked their way, sword drawn. Without a second thought, Henry's father bull rushed the man in question, tackling him out of their way before turning to his wife and kids. Hurry up and run. Alas, that was all he could do as the soldier drove his sword through the man's back. But, he bought them just enough time to leave the house. His wife didn't last long, either, as she too was cut down. Their eldest, however, barely managed to evade getting her head impaled by another man's spear. By sheer luck, the weapon got stuck in a nearby wagon, and she was not about to let this opening go to waste. Grasping her little sister's wrist with tears streaming down her cheeks, Henry turned around and bolted with all her might, 2 more soldiers hot on her heels. That look in Albedo's eyes, the sheer concern she conveyed Naruto, had spent so much time in this game world that he'd almost forgotten how expressive real people could be. It was just so jarring to see such a look on the face of an NPC that his brain needed a moment to reboot. Yup. Something was definitely wrong. Sorry, Naruto said reflexively, offering the succubus a sheepish chuckle. I didn't mean to worry you. It felt weird talking to her like this, but it was refreshing. But, unfortunately, his response had only worried the woman even more. "Are you alright, Millard?" Albedo asked, her face drawn closer to examine him, the scent of her perfume knocking Naruto out of his stupor. That's not right at all, he thought. In Yggdrasil, there was no stimulation to the player's sense of smell, so this scent shouldn't exist. Naruto hesitated, feeling a bit weird, but replied to her, nonetheless. "I am fine," he answered, "thank you." He wasn't the type to talk to dolls like this, but the genuinely human concern she seemed to express had caused Naruto to do so out of pure instinct. Her body language, her speech patterns, the way she carried herself, this was not how the AI of Yggdrasil acted. Or any AI for that matter. It was too sophisticated, too human. But, just as the panic started to sink in, the words of the guildmate rang in his mind and did absolute wonders in calming his tits. Panic is the seed of defeat, remain calm and think logically. Look beyond your surroundings and don't waste your effort on unnecessary details. Naruto silently thanked Pinidomo, Ainzulgaon's resident philosopher, and took a deep calming breath. "You look troubled, Millard," Albedo pointed out, her frown only deepening. "Please forgive me, but are you sure you're alright?" Naruto couldn't help but be entranced by her beautiful, limpid eyes. Though there was this cute, shy girl back in high school who seemed to like him, nothing ever came of that relationship because they were both too damn shy, and that was the closest Naruto had ever gotten to anything even remotely resembling a romantic relationship, although it was certainly not for lack of trying on his part. As was the case for many a high schooler, he had several crushes that never went anywhere. That being said, Naruto was way out of his element right now. He was not at all used to a woman approaching him like this, showing such genuine concern. He could feel his cheeks burn and his heart throb. He simply couldn't help but answer her truthfully, his mouth acting on its own. "I can't get in contact with a GM." Albedo stared at him in confusion before her eyes filled with such helplessness. The poor thing looked like a kicked puppy. He felt so guilty seeing her like that. Please forgive me, Lord Kurama," she lamented. "I have no idea what this GM is, but rest assured that I will do anything and everything in my power to help." Yup, they were actually having a real conversation. Such a thing should be impossible, but they were. The closest thing an NPC should be capable of to something like this was a macroed response to being addressed in a certain way. There were certain emotes and the like one could download for scripting certain roleplay events, but no one could ever hope to achieve something this sophisticated. "It's fine," Naruto insisted. "Really, it's fine. This is not your fault in the slightest." Taking a moment to collect his thoughts, he compassed himself. Something is definitely wrong, though well, if nothing else, he should see if the others reacted similarly, or if this was limited to Albedo. Upon looking over the butler and maids, however, Naruto could tell that they weren't acting normally either. Clearly, the first thing he needed to do was figure out what the hell was going on. With that realization in mind, Naruto took action. "Sebas," he barked. "Yes, Millard." The butler perked up, answering without hesitation. "I want you to meet up with Sheltier and scout the area around Nazarick," Naruto ordered. "If you encounter any hostiles, flee on sight until further notice and let me know immediately." As the butler bowed and took his leave to do just that, Naruto found himself having even more questions. Like all of the others, the butler in question was made to protect their base, so ordering him to leave should have been impossible. Thus, Naruto continued from there by addressing the others. "Pleiades." The 6 maids perked up and responded identically to Sebas in perfect unison. "Split up into pairs and make sure everything is as it should be in Nazarick. If you find anything even slightly out of place, let me know immediately. If you find any intruders, flee on sight and let me know." As Sebas had before them, the 6 maids bowed and took their leave. Before he could address her, however, Albedo beat him to it, looking concerned. "Shall I summon the 4 guardians?" "Not yet," Naruto told her, taking command of the situation. "Send them a message to be on high alert and let Sheltier know that Sebas is on his way to meet her." "I already have, Millard," the succubus replied with a bow. "I assume that they are to flee if they spot any intruders as well." "For now, yes," he confirmed with a nod. "The safety of Nazarick and her people are my first priority." "As it always has been," she commented approvingly, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Is there anything else you wish for me to do, Millard?" Naruto frowned thoughtfully and nodded. "Come here," he said. Naruto simply couldn't help himself. She looked so real that he had to confirm what his eyes were seeing. She looked surprised at first, but drew closer without a word, an enthusiastic grin quickly gracing her features as she did. Once again, he could smell her perfume. It was so sweet and pleasant. Naruto took hold of her hands at first. They were warm and soft. The silky feel was so much more real than it should be. Moving up to her wrists, he could actually feel her pulse. Was she actually real? There was only one way to find out. Yggdrasil was a tier-rated game, thus, R-18 acts were strictly forbidden, not just by the company, but by law, as per the Social Order Maintenance Act. What he was planning to do felt incredibly dirty, but still. "I gotta do this at all costs," Naruto thought. He was panicking because he got stuck in the game with no way out. He was just trying to force his way out. That would hold up in court, right? But what if she actually was real? Ludicrous as that notion sounded, it legitimately seemed like a possibility, now. And if that was the case, would this be Yule harassment? Again, there was only one way to find out. Albedo, he said awkwardly. Can I touch your breasts? Eh? You blew it, you noob. 9. There was a long, awkward silence as Naruto inwardly panicked, half expecting her to yell baka. And punch his lights out like a badly written tsundere. But then, a look of pure euphoria washed over Albedo as she gave her answer. Of course, Lord Kurama. Please, help yourself. She gleefully straightened up and presented her ample bosom to him the instant she realized what he'd actually said. She'd never expected him to be so forward. But still she was not about to look a gift horse in the mouth, and his awkwardness was just so cute. As the large, healthy breasts bounced enticingly before his eyes, Naruto could feel something stirring in his loins. For what felt like an eternity, he could only stare, salivating at the sight and smell. Then, he reached up and gave them a firm squeeze. He hesitated for a moment upon hearing Albedo's deep, hungry moan and continued. Yup, this all but confirmed it. There was no way he should be capable of doing this. In Yggdrasil, there were multiple safeguards preventing players from doing this kind of thing, even to NPCs. Anyone who tried would be banned outright, kicked off the server, and potentially arrested for disturbing the peace, public indecency, and disorderly conduct. Also, trapping him in a game and making them unable to log out was highly illegal, qualifying as a form of kidnapping, no less. But there was no way he could still be in a game. Even the VR images he played were not this convincing. 10. They felt so real. There was no doubt about it anymore. Laughably outlandish as it may seem, this game was no longer just a UIAH. Albedo's orgasmic wail brought his train of thought to a crashing halt, her knees buckling as she collapsed on top of him, and when she did, Naruto realized that her breasts had been freed at some point, his thumbs on her nipples. He immediately removed his hands out of sheer panic, having not realized that he'd taken it that far. The poor woman gasped for air and trembled like a leaf. Her cheeks were stained a bright red, her nipples hard, and eyes glazed over. I am so sorry. Naruto squeaked. Whatever he was about to say died on his tongue as she gave him a ravenous, desperate look. Am I to have my first time right here and now, Millard? See, come again. As many times as you wish. Albedo licked her chops hungrily. How shall I dispose of my clothes? Do you wish for me to do it slowly, or shall we be skipping to the main event as soon as possible? The fire in her eyes made him feel like a lamb before a starving lioness. Or would it be better if you unwrapped me yourself? Her rump swayed enticingly behind her as she giggled lewdly, her wings fluttered cutely, and she batted her eyelashes at him with such desire that Naruto almost lost control of himself right then and there. Whoa, 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 whoa. He raised his hands up defensively. And now's not the time for that. She flinched as if struck upon hearing that. And my apologies, Lord Kerr. No, it's fine. Naruto floundered a bit in his haste to fix the situation. It's entirely my own fault for losing control like that. You have nothing to apologize for. Wow. Albedo blinked owlishly at him and then turned beet red. To think she had such an effect on the man she loved despite his caliber, no less. It did wonders for her ego, but damn did she feel sheepish. Right, she sputtered awkwardly, making herself presentable once more. I insist that the fault is partially mine, though I lost control as well. 11. It's fine, Naruto sighed. Really, it is. I'm the one who started it, anyway. Though, how she wanted to hug him so badly or give him a peck on the cheek. Anything to show her appreciation, really. It took every ounce of self-control she had to resist, but Albedo knew that doing such a thing would only make this even more awkward. If you say so, Millard. What have I done? Naruto inwardly lamented. That was just supposed to be a bit of harmless mischief. Though, Tabula would be pleased. For Albedo to act this way it must have been because he changed her flavor text. Shit. I've defiled your baby, I'm so sorry. The succubus in question then cleared her throat and composed herself as best she could before changing the subject. Oriole has yet to report anything amiss, she pointed out. Grateful that she pulled him away from his train of thought, Naruto replied. Same goes for the floor guardians, he hummed thoughtfully, dwelling upon the situation for a moment. Tell the guardians of each floor to meet me at the amphitheater in an hour, if it turns out everything's okay. Of course, Millard, Albedo replied with a bow. Shall I be accompanying them? Yes, Naruto told her with a nod. Then, he gave another thoughtful hum. On second thought, let Gargantua go back to sleep when he's done scanning his floor. That's all I'm gonna need him for at the moment. As you wish. Naruto sighed and decided that he needed some time to himself. Rising from the throne he stretched his legs and turned to Albedo. I'll be in my bedchamber if anyone needs me. He hoped nobody would. The Yako needed some alone time to process this series of events. Kurama, Uzumaki Naruto, 12. The Ultimate Trickster. Racial classes. Kitsune. 10. Yako. 10. Oni. 10. Demonic Sorcerer. 5. Dog classes. Ninja. 15. Rogue. 10. Beguiler. 10. Arcane Trickster. 10. Assassin. 10. Master Assassin. 5. Necromancer. 5. Total level. 100. 35 racial. 65 job. Character stats. HP. 90 MP, 100 physical attack, 0 physical defense, 40 agility, limit exceeded, estimated to be about 150 magical attack, 100 magical defense, 40 resist, 80 special, 100 karma rating, -500 extreme evil. DMS notes and trivia. 1. Though this is definitely not canon, I feel like this technology would take a while to refine, and the process would result in some growing pains. So Sao's story, despite its shortcomings, kinda served as a good way to kick off the start of that journey in this slight AU. I mean, it was clearly written by someone who knows dick about video games, but still. 2. Given that Naruto is meant to replace Momonga, I feel like the latter needed an excuse to be absent. 3. It really seems like Momonga would do that, all things considered. I also can't help but picture Naruto taking his duties to the guild as seriously as he took his desire to become Hokage in his actual franchise. 4. Why do I smell vodka and gunpowder? Oh, realistically, I feel that would be horrible for the game. The PvP would be just horrendous as a result, but I don't want to take too many creative liberties, given what I've already changed while writing this story. Then again, Yggdrasil is a dead game, maybe this whole guild weapon thing was a factor in that. 5. Of course, some creative liberties have been taken. That said, y'all might want to strap in as I share with you the creative processes of Naruto's gear. It's a bit of a doozy, lol. First off, being a Wrath baby in World of Warcraft, I'm pretty intimately familiar with gear sets, and how much of a staple they were for the game back in my day, at least. Not sure how much of one they are now, seeing how I haven't played it since Kata, but they were when I played at least in the realm of higher tier gear, lol. That being said, while I can't say much in regards to other MMOs, gear in WoW certainly has a tendency to be a lot more OP than what one will find in a pen and paper RPG. Every item typically gives buffs to multiple stats, and the higher end ones usually have additional effects. Gear sets, meanwhile, would have set bonuses, basically bonus effects that activate when you're equipped with every item in the given set. So, I gave Naruto a gear set. Also, being as familiar with D&D as I am, particularly 3. 5. I felt the need to give Naruto a form of the weapon finesse feat, allowing him to dump one stat and focus on the others. It is, after all, what a power gamer would do. 6. Yes, I know, canonically, there's only supposed to be 67 statues, the job having been given up on before the remaining 5 were built as the guy doing it got bored, but I am simply too obsessive compulsive for that mental image not to with me. XD. They may just go ahead and say Naruto gave him the motivation to finish or something. 7. I know it's childish, but damn it, describing the Lemmichton as one last you was one of my favorite things to write so far in this fic, lol. 8. That just feels so in character for Naruto, far more so than Momonga, in my opinion. Though his motivation was different, that character's actions still felt somewhat out of place in canon, lol. 9. I simply couldn't resist the Overlord abridged reference, lol. 10. Yes, I know that diverges don't exist in canon, but I call bullshit. When a new technology is introduced, the first 2 questions humanity collectively asks are A. How do I kill people with it? And B. How do I get my rocks off with it? The latter is especially the case when it comes to this particular kind of technology, and VR porn exists even now. Just saying. Again, though, I'm gonna try and keep creative liberties like this to a minimum. No major changes to the actual setting will be made that would fundamentally change the story and how things played out. Characters will be depicted as closely to their canon counterparts as possible, that kind of thing. But shit like this shouldn't be an issue. 11. I feel like Albedo would react like that. Poor thing, lol. Having Bone Daddy being replaced by someone who still has the one bone that matters is gonna have some interesting effects on this story, methinks. Equals 3. 12. Well then looks like we're in for another doozy, lol. That said, Maruyama clearly has more familiarity with D&D than MMOs, from what I can see, but I've gotta say, I love this series and the setting thereof. That being said, Naruto's build is more or less my attempt at inserting a ninja from Naruto into his work, albeit with those levels of necromancer added in as an afterthought of said character. It makes sense that he'd need to adjust his build in the game's twilight, seeing how Momonga couldn't always be there to help maintain the tomb. So, he has the bare minimum amount of necromancer levels needed for the job. Of course, this means he ain't nearly as skilled in the craft as Momonga, so spamming death knights and shit is simply not an option for him. Also, Naruto is completely lacking the golden boy and eventual god mode bullshit that kinda killed his respective series for me, before Boruto adserped his corpse. Ahem. Yet, needless to say, I'm still kinda salty about how that series ended and Boruto's very existence, lol. That aside, though, because of the admission requirements of Ainzulgaon, being a functioning member of society and playing a heteromorph, Naruto's pretty obviously been mashed together with Kurama as a character, at least in terms of looks and abilities. As such, his build is more on theme with a kitsune, meaning more fire and illusions. He's also older, so of course he'll be a bit more mature, but this Naruto is still as Naruto of a Naruto as I could Naruto in the context of Overlord. Let's see if I can pull it off. Not 10 minutes after leaving the throne room, Naruto stood in his bedchamber, looking at a full-body mirror by the dresser and staring at his reflection. It was so weird to see his character's lips move while he was talking, and to hear a voice that was not his own when he did. But this was, apparently him, now. He could move his ears, he could move his tails, and yes, they were indeed his. Each and every last one of those tails were now his limbs, every bit as much as his arms and legs, they were indeed his limbs. How he had the muscle memory to move them was beyond his understanding, but move them he did. Similarly, it would seem his ears also helped convey emotion. Every time he smiled, they perked up, every time he snarled, they wanted to curl back, when he frowned, they flattened and so on. That would take some getting used to. He had also discovered that each and every item in this room actually existed. Now, the drawers and wardrobe were no longer just cosmetic, and were now filled to the brim with copies of outfits that he had in his inventory when the servers shut down, including the armor and jewelry. The books in his personal shelves were now real, too, the content specifically being his favorite ninja books, manga and such. Many of them were books he wanted to attain early, but never had the chance to. His desk, meanwhile, now had real papers and writing utensils in it. The bed was an actual bed that he could sleep in, everything was real. Some items that didn't exist in them were even here, now, like the dream version his Otaku shrine. Being such close friends with R-rantel, it was hard not to be corrupted, not that he minded too much. The conflicted smile spread across his face at the thought, fond of the memories while uneasy about his new situation. This will definitely take some getting used to, he commented. Then, his musings were interrupted by a female voice ringing in his head. Or Kurama, she said, sounding confused. This is Shapeshifting. The young-sounding woman was speaking to him through a low-tier spell called Message. As the name implied, it was a communication spell. What's wrong? It would appear that the swamplands outside of Nazarick are gone. Naruto frowned. That didn't sound good. Please clarify what you mean by gone. Back in Yggdrasil, the great tomb of Nazarick was located in a poisonous swamp of Niflheim. It was always nighttime and shrouded in a thick perpetual mist. The Shapeshifter was implying what he thought she was, then the tomb as a whole was somehow transported elsewhere. I mean that the landscape is completely different, she told him. The great tomb is now surrounded by a flat grassy plain, the skies are clear, the mist is gone, and the sun is up. The only landmarks I can spot from here are a forest to the north and a distant mountain range to the northwest. She cast a quick location spell to make sure, but yes, they were in those specific directions. 2. Naruto, meanwhile, frowned. That didn't sound like Nazarick's location in the slightest. Come to think of it, though, wasn't this the first time Shapeshifting has been outside the great tomb? How was she aware of what its surroundings were supposed to look like? Deciding that he'd ask her later, Naruto issued his orders. Retreat to the tomb and meet me at the amphitheater, he commanded. Bring Sebas with you. On my way, Millard. With that done, the kitsune cast a message of his own to revise the orders of a certain succubus. Albedo, he barked. Change of plans. The guardians are to drop what they're doing and meet me at the amphitheater save for Gargantua. Let him sleep. I'll explain why once everyone's there. Understood, Millard, she replied. The instant he received her response, the vulpine demon disappeared in a poof of smoke. Naruto instantly reappeared in the same manner as he vanished in the center of a mighty stone colosseum. The oval-shaped buildings stood nestled in the middle of the 6 floors lush rainforest. The scenery, including the skybox with a day and night cycle, was built and crafted with love and care by a guild member named Blue Planet. As his name would imply, the man was an environmentalist who longed to see the world as it once was, before it had been covered in a cloud of industrial and orbital pollution that blocked out the sun, the price of taking too long to colonize other worlds, many claimed. As for the structure, it was around 600 feet long, 500 wide, and just a little over 12 stories tall. At nighttime, which the skybox was currently set to, the continual light spell enchantments activated to bathe the arena in white light. The arena was modeled after the Roman Colosseum, save for a few creative liberties, such as the whole thing being black in color, and the architecture being more imposing. With the sole exception of a massive 1,500-strong invasion, every last poor bastard dumb enough to intrude upon the home of Ainzul met their end here if not sooner. It was quite frankly their guild's greatest achievement, partially made possible by the menagerie of high-level monsters they kept stored away in the lower levels of this Colosseum to face off against intruders in brutal melee. In the waning days of Yggdrasil, this was also where he set up a PvP date with Momonga-senpai, so that Naruto could adjust his build. Well, there were other ways to go about it. Dying and getting res with the spell raised dead was simply the most effective way to do so, and since Momonga-senpai started finding himself with less and less time to help, Naruto needed a few levels in Necromancer to properly maintain certain aspects of the Great Tomb. He only sported just enough to get the job done, but that was all he needed, specifically sacrificing 5 levels in Rogue to that end, since they were the most expendable. Of course, Momonga-senpai was more than happy to help and even offered his advice on which spells would be the most useful, though 1 or 2 were chosen purely for the coolness factor. It was the most fun they'd had in a long time, to be honest. 3. Pushing his nostalgia aside, Naruto looked around. Now, then where were those twins? Then out of the corner of his eye, the Yako saw a bit of movement in the VIP box, and spotted a small, lithe form leaping out just before landing in front of him in a crouch. There was no magic involved, just pure physical prowess. The form in question was that of a little girl, apparently somewhere between 10 to 13 years old. It was hard to tell, really, partially because of her race. The girl had dark skin and an unruly mop of gold that tickled her shoulders. Her long pointed ears made it clear that she was a dark elf, a species related to forest elves. 4. She looked up and smiled at him, showing herself to be a somewhat androgynous cutie with a heart-shaped face and mismatched eyes, one green and the other blue. She was garbed in leather armor reinforced with red dragon scales underneath her white vest and matching trousers. The crest of Ainzul gown was proudly displayed on her vest in gold. The elven girl finished her look with thick leather gloves, reinforced with metal plates, a golden acorn pendant around her neck, brown leather shoes and a metallic whip coiled up at her hip. Naruto immediately recognized her as Bella Fiore, one of the two creations of Byakubi-Kuchigama, both of whom were the guardians of the 6th floor, and as with all the others, she was far more expressive than he remembered, bouncing adorably on the balls of her feet as she eagerly saluted him. "Hello, Lord Kurama," she chirped. "What brings you here?" "Something weird," Naruto admitted with a sigh. "I want to wait for the other floor guardians to arrive before I say what, though." "Fair enough," she said with a shrug. Then, realized that her brother was conspicuously missing. Groaning in annoyance, she turned to the VIP booth and shouted, "Mayor, Lord Kurama has graced us with his presence. How long do you plan on being so rude to him?" A rather soft-spoken voice shouted back. "You know I hate heights. See, can't I just use the stairs?" "Oh, come on, now. Just jump already. You're making Lord Kurama wait." Aura groaned again as she returned her attention to Naruto. "I am so sorry, Lord Kurama," she lamented, turning towards the man in question. "Mayor's not trying to insult you, he's just really timid." "It's fine," Naruto chuckled, ruffling the girl's hair. "I understand perfectly." He couldn't help but smile at the exchange, having been reminded so much of Byakubi-Kuchigama and her little brother, Unforeseen. "Gah." Speaking of little brothers, Aura's twin squealed girlishly all the way down as he relented, stumbling a bit as he landed on his feet and ran up to Naruto. Of course, because everyone in his guild was apparently some kin to weirdo, Mayor Bellafiore was not at all dressed like a boy. Much like his twin sister, he seemed rather androgynous, not at all helped by the feminine bob cut he sported. 5. He wore an identical vest to Aura's and an acorn-shaped pendant around his neck, though his was silver. His clothes also had the same basic white color scheme, but that was where the similarities ended in terms of their outfits. Instead, he wore a short skirt, long stockings, knee-high boots and a green cloak over his shoulders. The red in his outfit was replaced with blue, and the gloves upon his dainty hands were much finer. Clutched in his grip was a gnarled black wooden staff. That all aside, Mayor was unmistakably Aura's sibling, sharing the same face and hair color. He was just far more timid, fidgeting nervously before Naruto, and which of his eyes were which color had been switched. His ears also pointed slightly downwards while Aura's pointed up, hinting at their differing personalities. "No need to be so scared, I won't bite," Naruto teased, ruffling the boy's hair and causing his cheeks to go bright red. Sorry," Mayor muttered shyly. Then, before anything else could be said, a swirling blackness emerged from the ground to create a semicircular doorway beside them. It was like someone's shadow came to life and lifted itself off of the ground. And then, a girl emerged from it, accompanied by Cephas. Her skin was pale as wax, and the girl's silver locks were pulled back into a long ponytail. She appeared to be around 13 or 14, but knowing her creator, this girl was probably a 1,000-year-old loli or some shit. Though Naruto was intimately familiar with her build, having often brought the girl along to defend Nazarick from invaders after most of the guild had quit, he'd never actually read her bio for fear of mental scars. 6. But, despite her height and petite frame, the girl in question didn't quite look like a traditional loli, as she apparently rocked quite the ample bosom for her age keyword. Apparently. Something seemed off about the way it bulged outward, but Naruto didn't quite know what. The Yako wasn't sure he wanted to know, either. That aside, this new arrival was garbed in black and dark pink with hints of white. She wore a soft, elegant ball gown, the skirt poofed out into a bell shape, along with a bonnet, bolero, and long gloves. The outfit covered nearly all of her skin and was almost excessively decorated with frills, lace and ribbons, and she twirled a matching parasol in her hands. The girl's crimson eyes bore a seductive look as she eyeballed Naruto with a hungry grin. This was Shultier Bloodfallen, creation and magnum opus to Unforeseen. "The sun didn't bother you, did it?" Naruto asked. Well, he never read her bio. The red-haired man knew she was a vampire, so he felt the need to be sure. All things considered, he wasn't sure how her kind would be affected in this new situation. She did mention that the sun was up, after all. 7. Not at all, Shultier chirped, giving him a reassuring smile. It slowed me down, but that was the extent of its effects. So, sunlight still had the same effects here as it did in Yggdrasil, then. Good to know, Naruto replied with a smile on his own. Then, he was taken aback when Sheltier suddenly closed the gap between them in a blur of inhuman speed. He caught a whiff of her very enticing perfume when she leaned forward with a giggle. "Thank you so much for your concer," and Sheltier purred. Unfortunately, before she could properly start putting the moves on Naruto, Aura decided to butt in with a scoff. "Something stinks," the elven girl commented. "You didn't start decomposing, did you?" And of course, Sheltier didn't take kindly to that. "Excuse me," whirling around to face Aura, she gave her an indignant look. "I will have you know that this is the finest of perfumes." Quite predictably, the little vampire was quick to retaliate, and Aura only returned fire with a harshness that could only come from a sibling, despite the girls not being at all related themselves. "You might want to get your money back, fake tits," she scoffed. "It smells like shit." "I never." Naruto couldn't help but find a bit of guilty pleasure in their exchange. They were acting just like a pair of catty sisters, thoroughly reminding him of the bickering he'd often hear from R-rantel and Kichigama. "So noisy," a deep gravelly voice commented, turning everyone's attention towards the source. The being lumbered forth, just over 10 feet tall and resembling a bipedal insect apparently made of ice. He had 3 eyes on either side of his head, a long tail lashed about behind him, and his powerful mandibles looked like they could sever a man's arm in one bite. In one of his multiple 3-fingered hands, he carried a long platinum halberd. 2 clouds of frost spewed from his face as he huffed at the ruckus caused by Sheltier and Aura. The creature in question was Cocytus, ruler of glaciers, guardian of the 5th floor, and creation of warrior Take Mikazuchi, a man who was all but obsessed with samurai and all things martial. It more or less reflected in Cocytus's sparse profile, if not his appearance. "You stand before a supreme being," Cocytus said, not at all amused by their lack of discipline. "Contain yourselves." "The brat started it," Sheltier muttered, pouting childishly. "Actually," Aura started. "That's enough, you two," Naruto interjected with a warm chuckle. As if a switch had been flipped, the two of them immediately compassed themselves. Aura bowed and Sheltier gave him a curtsy as they replied in perfect unison. "Yes, Millard." Naruto's smile only widened at that. "It was just so cute. I do hope those two haven't been causing you any trouble," Albedo called out as she too entered the arena. She was accompanied by 2 others, the last 2 floor guardians, save for Gargantua, victim of the 8th floor, and Demiurge of the 7th. 8. The former was an angel, though said creature looked like anything but, taking on the form of a bright pink fetus, roughly 3 feet long, with branches of holly for wings. A nostalgic grin graced Naruto's face when he saw this small creature. Back when the Union of 8 guilds with the aid of mercenary NPCs forming a massive party, 1,500 strong, no less raided Nazarick, it was Victim who played a key role in stopping them, which made Naruto think. That massive party was halted at the 8th floor, meaning literally everyone here, but Albedo had died in that battle. Even Naruto himself. To be fair, he was still experimenting with his build at the time, thus horribly under-level from constantly suiciding his character, and quickly one-shotted by one of their tanks, no less. In his defense, she also just so happened to be a paladin, but that was neither here nor there. Naruto had to wonder, though, did they even remember anything before this apparent transition to a new world? Did they remember dying? Pushing such grim thoughts aside for later, Naruto eyeballed the last arrival to this meeting. The man in question was a demon who very much lived up to his name, as one would expect from his creator, Albedo Leonodal. Granted, one would be forgiven for thinking Demiurge was an elf, given his sharp features, thin build, and pointed ears, but the fangs and long, spiked tail were a dead giveaway. The gangly man wore a red and white pinstripe suit with black leather shoes, black gloves and opaque, round lens spectacles with minimalistic, but still ornate frames. His skin was lightly tanned and his hair slicked back, making him look very much like a stereotypically evil businessman or politician. "As for your orders, Lord Kurama," Albedo said, "all of the floor guardians except for Gargantua are now present." She bowed before Naruto and the other guardians followed suit, one by one, though Victim had to settle for tipping lower to the ground. "Right," the Yako muttered. Then, he cleared his throat and addressed them professionally. "Before I summoned you all here, I sensed that there was something wrong." He decided to avoid gaming terms so as not to confuse them. Given that Albedo didn't recognize what a GM was, it was probably safe to assume that they didn't perceive Yggdrasil as a game. After sending Sebas to scout the area with Sheltier, he gestured to the beings in question as he mentioned them. "It was brought to my attention that the Great Tomb of Nazarick was somehow transported to another world. Literally no part of Niflheim even remotely fits Sheltier's description, so that was a fair assessment of their situation." Most of the floor guardians and their leader looked confused and concerned to hear that. "I have no idea what caused this to happen," Naruto continued. "But I'm feeling a bit paranoid about our new situation for obvious reasons." He eyeballed those present, one by one. "Does anyone here happen to know what might have caused this, by any chance?" "I'm terribly sorry, my love, but I do not," Albedo lamented. "I, too, am quite puzzled by this turn of events," Demiurge added. The other floor guardians' responses were similarly negative, as was Sebas. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. "Have any of you noticed anything out of place in the past hour or so?" "I certainly have not," Sheltier answered. "Aside from the obvious, of course." Nothing strange on my floor, Kasuda said, deciding to take his turn after her. Following his lead, Aura chimed in. Nothing weird on this floor. It's as she said, Mare added timidly. There have been no anomalies on the 7th floor, either, Demiurge said, looking puzzled. The 8th floor has been untouched since you left, Millard, victim stated. The princesses are making yet another ruckus, but that is the only thing of note at the moment. Knowing exactly whom the angel was referring to, Naruto shifted uncomfortably. That was yet another situation he wasn't sure how to deal with. I've noticed nothing amiss, either, Millard, Siba chimed in. I haven't noticed anything out of place either, Lord Kurama, Albedo told him with a frown on her face. Nor have Oriole and Gargantua for that matter. I'm so sorry that I can't be of more help. That's actually very helpful, Naruto assured. Straightening himself like he imagined a real leader might, the Yauko addressed everyone present. It means that whatever caused this was likely outside of Nazarick at the time then, he squinted, his ears flattening as he donned a puzzled look of his own. It is unsettling, though speaking of outside, he added, turning to Mare. If I remember right you're Druid, Mare. Why yes Millard. Would you happen to know Moverth? Mare perked up at that. Yes Millard. Good, Naruto chirped. I'm gonna want you to head outside with me and see what we can do to conceal the tomb. The last thing we need right now is an uninvited guest, and being on a flat plane means we stick out like a sore thumb. He then turned to Albedo. Until further notice, the safety of Nazarick and her people is my top priority. Put everyone on high alert and report anything out of place the instant you spot it, no matter how small. 9. As you wish, Lord Kurama. The company of 50 men rode towards the dying pillars of smoke with all their might. Gazastronov, the leader of the group, knew that he was too late to save this village, too, but he was gaining on these bastards. Like the 3 before it, the village had been put to the torch. He clicked his tongue in frustration at the sight of its butchered populace. Even the children hadn't been spared. What's the nearest settlement? Gazaf asked, looking to a man more familiar with the area. Karn village, the soldier replied. It's 10 miles north of here. Lead the way, then. With that, the company pressed on, passing by the town without a second thought. They knew they wouldn't find any survivors. There were never any survivors left in these bastards' wake. Henry looked behind as she and her sister ran, hand in hand, and saw that those 2 soldiers were still chasing them to her dismay. But, she grit her teeth and kept going. A little voice in her head told her that she should just ditch the girl and run on her own, but she viciously strangled it. No, she couldn't do that. Nemu was her little sister. Hurry. Henry panted. We can shake them in the forest. I'd like to see you try, one of the soldiers cackled. Henry ignored him and ran as fast as her legs could carry her, practically dragging poor Nemu along as they entered the forest. Though the foliage slowed the soldiers down more than it did the girls, given how familiar Henry and Nemu were with this forest, the 2 men still gained on them. Then, Nemu stumbled and took her big sister down with her. Henry narrowly evaded the soldier's attack, and with a roar of fury and desperation, she punched him in the head with all her might. She felt something pop and ignored the pain while scooping her sister back up and bolting once more. The soldier, meanwhile, staggered back. Though his helmet absorbed the blow, it still dazed the hell out of him. As he toppled over, his comrades stumbled clumsily to avoid tripping over him, and slammed into a nearby tree. But, they recovered quickly and were hot on the girl's heels once more. Then, moments later, Enu gasped, a line of hot pain across the woman's back cracking her to the core. She fell to her knees, clutching her little sister close. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she instinctively shielded Nemu as best she could. It's over, one of the men said, panting heavily from the chase. Though he was highly trained, the plate armor favored by the Baharth Empire still weighed him down, and his helmet made it hard to breathe. It did a number on his stamina, but he managed. After having stayed in the arena for a bit, testing to see if their relocation to this new world had affected their magic and abilities by using some of those monsters in the amphitheater as living targets, Naruto was pleased to note that there were no differences he could spot save for friendly fire being a thing, now. That wasn't a surprise, though, hell, all things considered, it would have been surprising if friendly fire wasn't a factor now. That said, once he was satisfied with his findings, and done with concealing the tomb, Naruto dismissed Mare and returned to the throne room where Albedo was waiting for him. Soon after sitting down, the Redeed found himself looking into a floating mirror, roughly 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide. The image therein, however, was not his reflection, but a field of grass. This was a mirror of remote viewing, a mid-tier magic item that allowed the user to view any area from a long distance save for those protected from scrying like enemy guild bases. He could still use it to scan Nazarick, but entrusted that task to the floor guardians, while he used the mirror to scout the surrounding area. The lush field was so different from Niflheim, and it stretched for miles. But then, he noticed a pillar of smoke in the distance and waved his hand. The image changed to the sight of a small village being attacked by men in armor. It was a shocking and gruesome display, but what troubled Naruto the most was that it excited him. The very thought appalled him, but it did. The carnage, the sight of blood, the pain and suffering in the eyes of the women and children as even they weren't spared, it filled him with a horrible glee that terrified the man behind the fox. 10. Naruto frowned in thought, rubbing his chin. In Yggdrasil, he had a karma rating of -500, which translated to him being as evil as possible. This was because it gave him access to quite a few spells and 2 classes he wouldn't be able to use otherwise, all of which were vital to his build. Strictly speaking, though, that was the only effect it had in him. But now was that karma rating why he felt this way? Well, he couldn't just sit here and watch, as much as he apparently wanted to know why would he though? These pitiful creatures were but insects or, mare, and oriole were exceptions, of course, but any humanoid beyond them only existed for his pleasure. Why should he? Naruto shook his head to dislodge those ghastly thoughts. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, of course. According to whom, though? Naruto couldn't answer that, and what scared him most was that he didn't know why. No, it's not the right thing to do, but the smartest. How so? Shut up, you. I know what I'm doing. Is everything alright? Albedo asked, looking concerned. You seem troubled, my love. Naruto hesitated, his ears flicking about. Yes, I'm just thinking is all. He turned to her. How quickly can you be ready for battle? Albedo looked surprised to hear that. In an instant, Millard. It was not an exaggeration. Because of the quick change gem on her clothing, she could quite literally change into her battle gear in the blink of an eye. If I may, why do you ask? It was then that Naruto spotted a cute blonde dragging a little girl to the woods, chased down by 2 soldiers. He couldn't help but think the woman had such an unfortunate hairdo. 11. We're going to collect a debt, Naruto replied ominously. Yes, that was the reason. Why let such a good opportunity for information go to waste? He'd swoop in, kill the soldiers, and accept information about this new world as his payment. As a bonus, it would also give him the opportunity to see how he stacked up to the people of this world. Moments later, Shultier stood in the throne room, using the mirror to track the blonde who caught the eye of the last Supreme One. A frowning Naruto and inappropriately geared Albedo stood behind her, ready for battle. The succubus, at Lord Kurama's behest, was garbed in her full-plate black armor with a frog-mouth helm specially built to accommodate her horns. Her wings were hidden, retracted into her back so she could pass for a human, and in her hands, Albedo held a wicked black bardage. 12. Bait. With a cry and an outstretched hand, Shultier willed a black semicircular vortex to appear before them. The spell in question was one of the most potent and accurate in all of Yggdrasil, rocking a 0% chance of teleportation mishaps and a literally infinite range, as long as the target didn't happen to be near or inside anti-teleportation wards. The only reason Naruto didn't know it himself was because his choices in classes simply didn't allow it. The blonde nodded at Shultier. Use the mirror to keep an eye on us, he told her, narrowing his eyes at the swirling mass of chaos. I don't want to take any chances, and we don't know what these people are capable of. Shultier bowed her head. Of course, Millard. Naruto offered the small vampire another nod and, without hesitation, went first, drawing his sword. The scenery changed in an instant to that of the blonde's location, as he stepped through the portal. The soldiers trembled before him and a sadistic grin spread across Naruto's face. He approached them, using his shadow step ability so as not to make a sound while he did. Then, when one of them attacked, he cast his spell. Silent Magic. Cloud of Knives. When he did so, Naruto used the metamagic ability Silent Magic, so that he didn't have to shout the name, and potentially alert any nearby soldiers. Such abilities were quite useful for magic casters in Yggdrasil, enhancing spells in countless potential ways, so as to allow for even the lowest tier incantations to be useful, no matter how strong one's opponent is. They could also add to the already ridiculous versatility of being a magic caster. As for why the spell itself didn't make any noise, that was because of another ability. Arcane Stealth. It was an ability unique to Beguilers which hushed any sounds that would otherwise be made by a spell cast with silent magic. And by the time a terrified Enri looked to see what was going on, the 2 soldiers were, for lack of a better word, gone. She looked about, ready to hurl at the sight. All that remained of the men was a pair of red stains upon the ground, their mangled armor now completely unrecognizable. She knew not how he did it, nor did she want to, and then, he turned his attention to her and smiled. As soon as he sheathed his sword, Enri heard the distinct clatter of someone in full plate approaching. Fearing that it was another one of those soldiers, she looked in the direction of that blackness, and saw that it had already disappeared. In its place was a woman in black plate, armed with a massive baltix. Enri had no idea whether to be relieved or terrified. Unbeknownst to her, as the red-haired man with 9 tails approached, she had a damn good reason to be scared. This girl was pretty cute and healthy. She had a nice rack, white hips, a slender, but toned physique. She smelled nice, too. The lingering scent of her tears, and that of her blood were very enticing for some reason. He wanted her, he wanted to feel her warmth, to hear her screams, to see tears spilling anew from those lovely, honey-colored eyes, as he tore that brown and yellow dress to shreds, and had his way with her. It's not like anyone would miss these 2, after all, and the little one would also make for a nice pet. No? Naruto took a calming breath and resisted, hiding his inner struggles quite well. I'm here for information, he told himself. That would just make it harder to get for no good reason. If there were any women among the people attacking the village, though, well, they were fair game, right? Forcibly pushing those thoughts aside, Naruto cautiously drew closer to the young woman and kneeled before her. Producing a little vial of red liquid, he handed it to her. "Drink this," he said. "Be blood." Henry muttered. That's what it looked like to her. She turned pale. Was he planning to turn her into a demon or something? Naruto stared at her oddly. Did this mean that healing potions didn't exist in their world? Did that word mean something else in their language? Did they even understand him? 13. The blonde timidly accepted the vial, but then, her little sister panicked. "Henry, no." Nimue cried out. "Don't do it." "Excuse me." Albedo growled. Her tone sent a cold shiver up the woman's spine. "My lord just saved you pathetic insects out of the kindness of his heart, and yet you dare question him." "I'll do it," Henry sputtered, establishing once and for all that she indeed spoke the same language. "Just please, don't hurt my sister." Albedo raised her bardic poised to lop the blonde's head off. "You'd better, you worm. Now. No need to be so hasty." Naruto looked at her, his sharp gaze ordering her to stand down. "They've been through a lot and are just scared is all." The enraged succubus immediately calmed down, her mood doing an uncomfortably swift 180. "My apologies, Lord Kurama." He raised an eyebrow at her. "I'm not the one you should be apologizing to. Why should she apologize to them, though?" Naruto's eye twitched again, and he quickly and forcefully pushed that annoying voice in his head to the side. Albedo quirked her own eyebrow at the kitsune, though no one could see it, with her helm covering her head. He then made a gesture to the girls, reading her body language like a book. What you wanted from her finally came to the succubus. She didn't want to do such a thing, but to question or defy him was nothing short of blasphemous, and well, as long as it was for his benefit. "I apologize." Albedo sounded like it took every fiber of her being to be respectful towards these creatures, but did as she was asked. Naruto figured that was the best he was going to get out of her and didn't push it. He gave her a satisfied nod and turned to address the girls. "This is a healing potion from my homeland," he explained. It wasn't untrue, it just felt weird to put it that way. "You have nothing to worry about. I'm Kurama, by the way, and this is Albedo. We're here to help." Ebi visibly calmed down at that and drank the potion without hesitation. She felt a warm sensation wash over her and, in an instant, the pain was gone. Even her hand felt fine. Looking down, she moved it experimentally and saw that it was no longer stiff. Then, she reached behind and patted her back. Her dress was still ruined and the blood was still there, but the wound was gone. Ebi then smiled, looked Naruto in the eye, and bowed as best she could in her position. 14. Thank you, Lord Kurama, she said. Given how this Albedo woman addressed him and how he dressed, he was clearly some degree of nobility, so of course he was entitled to such respect. Albedo, meanwhile, grudgingly approved of the respect she displayed. At least the worm knows her place. "You're welcome," Naruto chirped, giving the blonde a wide, charming smile. Then, he turned to Albedo. "Slaughter anyone attacking the village, except for their leader," he ordered. "I want to capture him alive for interrogation. Leave the villagers be for now." "A pleasure, Milord." The way she said this shook Henry to the core. In that moment, she knew how lucky they were to have these two on their side at least for now, and how important it was for her to ensure they stay on it. But would she be able to? If so, how? She had nothing of value to give, and it wasn't like a man of his standing would accept a common girl like her as payment, right? Henry didn't know how to feel about that option, if it even was on the table. But he was clearly a kind lord and quite handsome. She felt her cheeks burn at the thought. "Sheltier, keep an eye on her and let me know the instant she needs help." "As you wish, Millard." Then, Albedo disappeared in a blur of speed, scaring poor Henry even more, and pulling a pair of yelps from the girls. "She's scary," Nimue commented with all the bluntness and tact one would expect from a child. "Sorry about her." "She's not fond of commoners," Naruto said apologetically. Getting on this woman's good graces would allow him to find out a little more about this world, after all. That made him think, though this is a bit of a random question, but do you know about magic? And he perked up at that. "Why yes, actually," she replied. "A friend of mine is an alchemist who visits Karn village every now and then. I just didn't recognize your healing potion because the ones he makes are blue." "Interesting." "Karn village," Naruto repeated thoughtfully, filing the information about the potions away for later. "Is it the name of your home?" "Yes." "Well, let's make sure you have a home to return to, then." With that, Naruto reached into a black hole of some kind that briefly appeared before his hand, and pulled out two small horns with leather straps. "Hide in the woods until I come back," he said. "If you get into trouble, blowing one of these will call some allies to help you out." The little horns were two copies of a low-tier magic item from his world, called the Horn of the Goblin General. Despite its name, it only summoned 12 of the little buggers, 2 archers, 2 riders and their wolf mounts, a cleric, a mage, and a commander being among them. In Yggdrasil, it was a trash item for noobs. Truth be told, Naruto only still had the damn things because he forgot to sell them, but given how easily those 2 soldiers died, they should do the trick hopefully. "Why does it matter if they don't though?" "Quite, you. I cannot thank you enough," Henry said. "I couldn't possibly hope to repay you." "Don't sweat it," Naruto said, giving her a charming grin. Then, he turned to leave and paused looking at his staff and letting out a sheepish chuckle. "How did I not notice that I brought this whip?" And he turned betrayed at that. Still, though I owe you my life and my sister's. Well, as I'm sure you noticed, I'm not from around here, Naruto told her with a chuckle. Tell me everything you know about where we are when I get back to you, and we'll call it even. Then, he disappeared in a poof of smoke, drawing a startled yelp from the blonde. Emir looked around and saw that he really was gone. Then, she sighed, a dissatisfied pout marring her pretty face. That's hardly a fair trade, though. A feminine roar filled the air, a sign for this slaughter to become a different kind of massacre. In the blink of an eye, the hunters became the hunted as a woman in black armor leapt into the fray. Lance Di Jalampo swore under his breath more times in the past 10 minutes than ever in his life. He was a faithful man, one who'd look down upon those who didn't worship his gods as fools, but when she appeared, each and every swing of her axe cutting his men down like wheat, cleaving armor and bone alike with ease, he couldn't help but question if the gods existed himself. "K kill her?" The woman cackled maniacally, taking 3 down with a single swing. During their attack on Karn village, Lan's forces had chased all of the villagers to the town square and surrounded them, prepared to slaughter each and every last one of them, but now, not even half of his men remained. This should have been impossible for men in full plate armor to be cleaved through like paper, for them to fly through the air like a child's playthings. It was inconceivable. Albedo, meanwhile, didn't give a shit. She just plowed through their ranks like a pissed-off rhino, laughing gleefully all the way at the havoc she wrought. It was just so fun, the screams of pain and terror, the scent of their blood, the looks of pain and horror. It was EXHILARATING. 15. Retreat. One of the soldiers turned and screamed like a little girl, and soon enough, a general rout had followed. Run for your lives. She'll kill us all. Mommy. Make it stop. Can you get back in formation? Lance shouted desperately. Don't turn your backs on her, you fools. Unfortunately for these puny insects, Albedo was faster than them, and she took great pleasure in exploiting how vulnerable they were. The carnage only continued from there, the villagers cowering in fear, but she ignored them. It was like they didn't even exist. No, it was the soldiers she wanted. All except for their leader, as per the orders of her love. Speaking of, Lance didn't know what happened. But for some reason, his whole body seemingly forgot how to move, and he went utterly limp. He was still conscious, but no matter how hard he tried, his body would not obey. Then, a shadow loomed over Lance's prone form and flipped him onto his belly with a kick. Naruto quickly got to work in hog-tying his new prisoner. After hearing this guy barking orders, he easily identified the poor sap as their leader. The Yako looked different though, so as not to startle the villagers too much. Most notably, his vulpine traits were missing, and his eyes looked like those of a human, though they retained the same color. It wasn't an illusion, either. This was made possible by one of his racial classes. Kitsune. Since his species was one of shapeshifters, he could take on the form of any humanoid or demi-human at will, with the ability to alter self, provided that the new form is no less than half his size, minus the tails. The change was purely cosmetic, though. He wouldn't inherit the naturally sharp hearing of an elf or the hardiness of a dwarf, for example, by taking on set forms. And though he never tried taking on the form of a woman, let alone long enough to find out for obvious reasons, Naruto assumed that he wouldn't inherit a certain drawback, either. As for why it took him so long to get here, well, after noticing that he'd carried the staff of Ainzul here without realizing it, he took a quick little detour as it were. That way, if any hostiles that he and Albedo couldn't deal with on their own were here, he wouldn't have to worry about it being destroyed. Sorry for the scare, Naruto called out. We mean you no harm. Gah. Of course, the throttle of that one last soldier didn't help. The Yako cleared his throat, pushing back his amusement at the Wilhelm scream. That said, he continued awkwardly, I'm not going out of my way to help you for free. He gestured towards Albedo. She and I are not from around here. In fact, we're from very far away, and we got lost, so we will gladly accept any information you have about our location as payment. It made more sense than the truth, in all honesty, and Naruto somehow doubted that anyone here, even Albedo, would believe him if he told them about his actual situation. I see. The comment came from an elderly man among the crowd as he stepped forth. May we have the privilege of knowing our saviors' names? Naruto hesitated for a moment as Albedo came to his side. He had a lot of questions about this world, but some new ones came to mind in that moment. Was he the only player who came here? Would someone recognize his name if he wasn't? If there were any other players here, would they be nearby? Come to think of it, Naruto had no reason to believe he was the only player here. With that thought in mind, Naruto stood up and approached the man with the grace of a nobleman, hands behind his back. There may be a way to find out. I am known as Ainzul, he declared. You can call me Ains. He then gestured to a rather befuddled succubus and continued. This is my wife, Albedo. It took every ounce of the woman's self-control for her not to flinch at the word wife. Because of his keen senses, Naruto could see and hear many of the villagers whispering quietly, commenting on how foreign his name sounded. Good. If he was lucky, they'd spread that name like wildfire. In Yggdrasil, that name carried with it quite a bit of infamy, especially after they successfully repelled that 8-guild alliance. The fact that they were among the top 10 guilds in their heyday only made it more so. If anyone from Yggdrasil was in this new world, they'd likely recognize that name immediately and hopefully seek him out. Of course, there was no guarantee that would happen, but it seemed to be worth a shot nonetheless. Pushing those thoughts aside, he then addressed the elderly man once more. Am I right to assume that you are the leader of this village? It felt weird talking like this, but it was pretty likely that they thought he was a man of high standing, given his attire and the fact that he was accompanied by a woman in full plate, so he did his best to sound the part. Naruto was not too surprised when the man shook his head. He was killed in the attack. I'm sorry to hear that, the disguised Yako said. He sounded sincere, but deep inside, Naruto was unnerved to note that he felt nothing but complete apathy. Seriously, what was going on with him? I hope you get back on your feet soon, then. He paused for a moment before giving the man a charming smile. Now, about that information. Of course, the man replied. If you and your wife wish to rest, then please do feel free to talk in my house where you can have a seat. It's still intact by some miracle. Thank you, Naruto chirped. Then, the young man perked up as if he just remembered something. Oh, one more thing. There were these two girls I helped on my way here. They're hiding in the forest right now. I should go fetch them before I do that. Very well, then, the elderly man said with a respectful bow. The old man, who was apparently serving as this village's de facto chief for the time being, lived in a quaint little hovel near the village square. It was sparsely furnished, and what few personal effects he had were entirely functional. The house itself, meanwhile, was all one big room, reminding Naruto of his studio apartment in the real world. The other one? Questions for later. The room was exclusively illuminated by natural light from the windows, though they did their job well enough, and a rickety table sat in the center of it all. Naruto eyeballed the woman, presumably this guy's wife, slaving away at the fireplace, and then took a gander at the farming tools. As expected, there wasn't much of anything in the way of modern technology, though it did beg the question of how magic would affect this world's development if it hasn't already. The woman herself, like her presumed husband, was remarkably toned for her age, at least by Naruto's standards. It really put into perspective how rough a medieval farm life could be in comparison to that of the modern-day peasantry. Naruto and Albedo took a seat while the elderly man sat before them. What is it you wish to know? As much as you can give, Naruto told him. The lay of the land. The nation. The leaders. Anything you can tell us. He sighed, taking a moment to choose his words and continued. To say that I'm not from around here is an understatement. He paused a bit, letting his words sink in and then shifted to his true form, all 9 tails and his vulpine ears fading into existence, his pupils slitting and their eyes glowing. I was passing myself off as a human because I didn't want to startle everyone while dealing with those bastards. The man and woman could only stare. Truth be told, Albedo and I are from another world entirely, Naruto said. Our home ended up in this world, and we want to figure out how, but to do that, we first need to know where. Here is for lack of a better way to put it. Alright, the old man replied hesitantly, not quite knowing how to react. Given what you've done for us, that's the least we could do. He caught himself before he could stare at Naruto's tails, not wanting to be rude. Forgive me, but if you don't mind me asking, what are you, exactly? I am what is known as a kitsune, a race of fox people with the ability to shapeshift, Naruto explained. My wife and I are from Niflheim. You probably wouldn't have heard of it. Assuming this wasn't a Nordic world. Naruto saw no indications that it was. Though said culture wasn't very visually distinct from the rest of Europe in the medieval period from what he could tell, so it was hard to say for sure. I can assure you that I haven't, the man told him, looking just a little overwhelmed. Well, to start, you are in Karn village, part of the Riesti's kingdom. To the south is the slain theocracy, and to the west is the Baharth Empire, which is where the men who attacked us are from if that armor is anything to go by. Safe to assume that they're at war with the kingdom, then, Naruto mused aloud. It would appear that they are now. The kingdom and the empire clash regularly, but an outright invasion like this hasn't happened in some time as far as I'm aware. So they have a potential enemy. And it's an empire. Great, he hoped it was nothing like the empires of old. Naruto was far more of a ninja otaku than a general history guy, but even he knew that it'd be a pain in his ass. If this Baharth Empire, which Nazarick now bordered as well, was anything like the Roman Empire, then Naruto's just had another reason to focus on gathering information and bolstering the Great Tomb's defenses. 1. Hiding his worry as best he could, Naruto rubbed his chin with a thoughtful frown. I see, he said. Please continue. The old man nodded and did just that. Once Naruto and Albedo left the de facto chief's house, they'd learned quite a bit about this new world. Like in Yggdrasil, this world had multiple races and monsters of all sorts, dwarves, elves, goblins, orcs, ogres, and the like. Something called the Wise King of the Forest also apparently lived somewhere in the Great Forest of Top. No one knew what the hell it was, though, so they should probably look into that. Given her skillset, Naruto decided that he should send Ore in there to do so, and find out what else might be hiding in there. Also, according to the de facto chief, R-rantel was the biggest nearby city. Though he didn't know how big the population was, it seemed like a good place to gather information. All in all, the old man was very helpful. There were, of course, some details he simply could not provide, but that was to be expected of a man who spent his life in the boonies. Then, soon after Naruto received every last bit of information the old man had to give, someone knocked on the door and informed them that the funeral was ready to begin. Of course, Naruto and Albedo paid their respects, if only to seem polite, but when Naruto spotted Enri leaving, he soon followed her with his wife in tow. Feeling the eyes upon her, Enri turned around just in time to see Lord Kurama loom over her, slamming a hand on the wall behind her. Enri squeaked, her cheeks burning red, though she knew not why. Albedo, meanwhile, felt like choking it for reasons similarly unknown. So, Naruto said charmingly, putting on his best smile, about that payment. At that, Enri's cheeks felt like they were on fire, as her teenage hormones left the poor thing jumping to literally all of the best and worst conclusions she possibly could, with no in-between, at the same time. Oh, my gods. 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 2. By the time Naruto was done interrogating the poor, flustered Enri, asking around for directions to R-rantel, and presenting himself as a good Samaritan, he noticed that the sun was already starting to set. Holy shit, we've been out here for this long. Naruto honestly could not believe it. But then, just as he was about to take his leave, a terrible commotion rose from the southern reaches of Karn village. Well, shit, Naruto muttered. Might as well see what's going on, I guess. Albedo frowned in concern under her helm, but said nothing as she dutifully followed. It didn't take long for them to approach the village square, and when they did, the former addressed a familiar old man. Something wrong, chief. Oh, Lord Ains. The man looked relieved to see him. A troop of what looks like mounted soldiers are approaching. They're not uniformly equipped, though. I see. Naruto sighed and looked around. Many of the village folk looked utterly terrified, not that he could blame them. Pushing down and hiding the sadistic glee he felt from their expressions, the disguised kitsune shrugged. Can be helped, he said. Gather everyone on the other side of the village. If they happen to be hostile, then I'll deal with them. Are you sure? Don't sweat it, chief. It'd be a waste to let you all die now after I went through all of that trouble. Consider this a free buy. The de facto chief didn't know how to feel about that, but nodded and did as he said. As the villagers ran past him and Albedo, the two of them headed south to meet these men. The succubus trailed behind, ready to defend her love at a moment's notice. Then, soon enough, the horsemen came into view, and Naruto quickly took note that they were indeed outfitted differently from one another. Were they bandits perhaps? The soldiers from before were all heavily armored, their breastplates bearing the sigil of the Baharth Empire. These men were all lightly armored at the least, but very few of them were heavily so. And even those who were wearing full-plate donned armor of a very different design. Most, however, were not but mail hauberks and helmets, while some sported bits of plate for added protection. They all halted and their apparent leader dismounted, walking up to meet Naruto. He was the most striking of the men, with chiseled features and a scar on one cheek. He had short brown hair and a matching beard, and his steely coal-colored eyes lingered on Albedo for a moment, seemingly sensing something off about her, before turning to Naruto. I am Gaza Strunov, warrior captain of the Riesti's kingdom, he announced. I have been tasked with exterminating the raiders who have plagued these lands. And you are. Naruto could tell he wasn't lying, thanks to an ability known as sense motive. It was a passive skill available to rogues, bards, and ninja, which allowed him to discern if someone was lying from a glance. It was of course completely useless against players, but came in quite handy for certain quests, as it allowed him to unlock some secret side quests on occasion when interacting with NPCs. In this new world, however, it appeared to work on everyone. At the same time, though, Naruto probably didn't need this ability to tell the man was being sincere. The crests they wore also matched old man's description, and they were definitely geared like warriors of the Riesti's kingdom. Naruto smiled. This was a golden opportunity to establish good relations with the kingdom they ended up in. The reason this village is still here, Naruto told him. A foreigner by the name of Ains Ulgaun. Feel free to call me Ains if you'd like, warrior captain. Gaza frowned at that, unable to believe that this man and his apparent companion would be enough to achieve such a thing alone, but at the same time, he couldn't sense any signs of deceit. I can vouch for him, the de facto chief chimed in as he approached. His wife was terrifyingly powerful, she did most of the work from what I could tell. Filing that information about the woman away for later, Gazef returned his attention to Naruto, and offered him a respectful bow. Then I thank you for your generosity. I did it for a payment, so there's no need to thank me, Naruto told him with a sheepish chuckle. So you're an adventurer. Close enough. I haven't joined any guilds, yet. Naruto was planning on doing so, but the closest one was apparently an R-rantel. They even managed to capture the leader, the elderly man added. Really, now? Gazef looked at Naruto with interest. The red-haired man shrugged helplessly. Had a nearby friend question him, but she was too rough, he explained. After the dust had settled, he snuck him away, told Shaltier to open a gate, and chucked him in with the orders to bring that man to Nurnus Painkill. Unfortunately, said NPC lived up to her name a teensy bit too well, and the little died of shock as a result, but not before feeding them some very interesting nuggets of information. All she was able to get out of him before he died was that he was not their actual leader, and that they were from the slain theocracy, Naruto continued. Apparently, they're trying to start a war between the kingdom and the empire. Or rather, a real one. That is troubling, Gazef muttered. Unfortunately, their conversation was interrupted by one of Gazef's men. Warrior Captain, he sputtered, looking winded. Our scouts have spotted a massive force gathering around the village and closing in. They are of the slain theocracy. Everyone take heed, a voice spoke softly among the crowd as they took their positions. The little piggy has been snared. The speaker was a man with very plain features. His most outstanding traits were the black sclera of his cold, blue eyes and the scar across his face. His golden hair was cropped incredibly short, and he was garbed in priestly attire. His name was Nigan. Offer up your thanks to the gods. The group all bowed their heads and uttered silent prayers as per the traditions of their faith. It was required by their religion for them to do so before starting an operation in a foreign land. Once they were done, their commander gave the order to begin and they moved in as one. These men were a Black Ops group of the Six Scriptures. Though their reputation was spread far and wide, little was actually known about them, mostly because they had a high bar to enter. To join, one had to be in excellent physical condition with an unshakable faith and the capacity to cast third-tier divine magic. In short, this group was the elite among the elite, and they went by the name Sunlight Scripture. 4 times, Gazastronov had evaded them, but now, they had him for sure. Next time, I'd like to ask other teams for help and have them do the work, Nigan commented. We should, one of his men concurred. Our specialty is extermination, after all. This is a strange mission, another commented. We usually have backup from the Windflower Scripture for something so important. It is strange indeed, Nigan mused aloud. I don't know why they only deployed us this time around, but it doesn't matter. Our mission is to kill Gazef, and we will succeed. His men cheered as one. Yes, they'd get him this time. That with the jet black sword wasn't here to save him, of that, they were certain, and he had nowhere to run. Gazef peeked out from inside a darkened house on the outskirts of the village, his men and their horses hiding amongst the rubble. From what they could see, 3 people from in there, all moving in unison, equally far apart from one another. Their robes implied that they were magic casters, and the creatures who accompanied them, flying just above their formation, made it their specialty clear. Angels. The winged creatures seemed to be made of porcelain and golden light, semi-humanoid in shape, but jagged and monstrous with no visible faces. They were most notably favored by the slain theocracy, seen by the denizens thereof as messengers of the gods, and practically confirming Ains's claims, even before the casters were close enough for the warrior captain to see their robes. The sigils on them removed all doubt. Who are these people and what do they want? Naruto asked. There's nothing of value in this village. That's where you're wrong, Gazef told him. They've been after my head for some time now. Oh, really? That was surprising. So this was an assassination and they had to know he was here. I'm guessing that raid from earlier was bait for this trap, then. So it would seem. Though he didn't show it, Gazef was panicking deep inside. He turned to Naruto. Ains, would you allow me to hire you? The Raid frowned thoughtfully. Tell me exactly what I'm up against and I'll consider it. I wouldn't just jump into battle without knowing what I'm dealing with. Well, that was informative, Naruto mused aloud as he and Albedo slipped out of the town proper, shadowing Gazef and his forces. We're not going to save them, too, are we? Albedo asked, wondering why her love was acting like this. Naruto shrugged. Well, we are being paid, he replied. Also, it'd be smart in the long run to have allies. Albedo perked up at his words, stopping dead in her tracks, and Naruto swore he saw a little light bulb cartoonishly pop up over her head. Oh, so that's what you're planning, eh? My deepest apologies, Millard. I have no idea what I was thinking, Albedo lamented, bowing deeply. It's fine, Naruto said, giving her a sheepish chuckle. We all make mistakes. Seriously, though, what in the actual was she on about? 3. Unfortunately, before he could ask, his train of thought was interrupted when he noticed a certain elven girl approaching. Lord Kurama, Aura whispered. Sheltier said you needed help. Ah, there you are, Naruto chuckled, ruffling her hair. He specifically asked the vampire to send her because she had the highest stealth skill in all of Nazarick, which would help avoid awkward questions. What's the status report on our forces? Demiurge is now helping Sheltier keep an eye on things, the elf told him. Cocytus and Mare have yet to see anyone approaching Nazarick, and I have those 8 edge assassins you wanted. What are your orders, Millard? The leader of those mounted soldiers just commissioned my help in defending this village, he replied. Our currency is useless here, so I accepted his offer. You're my second pair of eyes. If any of those angels and casters out there slip past his men, take him out. Gazef only has 50 men, so his forces are spread too thin to be of much use on their own. You focus on the south while Albedo and I head north. Of course, Lord Kurama, Aura told him with a bow. Naruto gave her a nod and cast message. Demiurge, he said. Let me know where I need to plug any gaps. Also, don't be afraid to lend me and Aura some strategic advice. She's more of a scout than anything, after all, and I can't see everything from down here. 4. The demonic floor guardian responded immediately. As you wish, Lord Kurama. Given that Demiurge's bio made him out to be a tactician, it seemed safe to assume that Albert's creation would be quite good at the role he was given. As for Cocytus and Mare, they were put in charge of guarding Nazarick's perimeter in his absence. Alright, Naruto mused aloud, time to get down to business. He turned to Or. Get in position, stay out of sight, and be ready to help Gazeth's men. Yes, Millard. Or chirped, giving him a salute, before running off to do precisely that. Naruto chuckled warmly at her enthusiasm. Then, he beckoned Albedo to follow. Now, let's catch up with them. A few minutes later, Naruto chuckled warmly as he followed Gazeth, just out of earshot. You know, it was surprisingly hard to be as civil as I was with the humans of this world, he admitted. But I kinda like that one in particular. He reminds me of Touch Me Senpai. Is that why you accepted his request for our services? Albedo asked. Naruto shook his head. I just needed the money, really, and I was gonna defend the village anyways. I've got plans for it, after all that, and getting on his good side might be beneficial. Understood, Millard. Naruto could tell that she felt conflicted. He smiled and rubbed her back. Well, think of it this way. If we have allies, they can serve as a buffer between us and anyone who wants to do us harm. Albedo perked up at that and nodded. Ah, I see what you mean, she said. He's weak, but more expendable. His rank could also be of use. She could tell that he was roughly on par with some of Nazarick's more powerful pop monsters, but at the same time the Nat could still use his sphere of influence to make things easier for them in the long run as expected of a Supremo NE. Albedo gushed as she realized just how useful this human could be for Lord's ultimate goal. Please forgive me for questioning you. It's fine, Naruto told her, looking rather sheepish. Be prepared to intervene. With them being so badly outnumbered, I'm not at all confident in Gazeth's ability to survive for long. Of course, am I a low RD? Meanwhile, with Gazeth, he could feel his horse's agitation. He frowned. Even a trained warhorse know, precisely because she was a warhorse, Beauty knew they were running towards certain death. But, it couldn't be helped. There were only about 20 actual men surrounding the village, but with the angels, Gazeth's forces were outnumbered 2-1. Their encirclement was airtight, too. Gazeth knew full well that he was riding into a trap, and to spring it meant certain death, but there was simply no other choice. His men stood no chance against these bastards in ranged combat, so they had to close the gap if Gazeth and the others were going to do jack shit against them. So, he planned accordingly and split his company into groups of 10, each one tasked with bull-rushing one of the commanders surrounding the village. Each charge was led by the heavy cavalry with the light cavalry close behind, in hopes that they could finish the charge. It was an absolute last resort tactic. Many of his men would die in this desperate assault. Still, though, this was their duty and these bastards would only pursue, and continue to burn and pillage while they were at it, if he fled. For the kingdom. Gazeth shouted. Only the thunder of hooves and battle cries of his men followed as they all spurred their horses in charge. The angels met them with a charge of their own. Then, one of the mages they were charging at stretched out his hand and cast a spell of some kind. Gazeth's horse neighed and started turning around, completely disobeying him, despite everything he tried. Damn it. Gazeth cursed, his attempts at turning his steed around to face the enemy being futile. Then, he yelped, feeling something slam into his back. He thought it was the angel's spear at first, but immediately after the impact, he heard a feminine roar and cackle, followed by the distinct sound of someone being cleaved in half. The strongest warrior of the Riesti's kingdom was quite familiar with that noise, as he tended to make it on the battlefield. One swing of his sword often did just that. Gazeth turned to look and saw the now bisected angel hitting the ground before seemingly evaporating as Albedo leapt up and lopped the head off of another one. Then, the mage beyond them fell in a boneless heap, Naruto standing behind him, and Beauty shook her head in confusion at the spell being broken. 5. Seizing the opportunity, Gazeth turned his steed around and ran to aid his right flank, upon seeing that they were struggling with their batch of angels. Chains of hell. Naruto shouted out, stretching a hand at one of the angels. The creature was stopped mid-charge before it could kill one of Gazeth's men. Black chains of dark magic ensnared it, pulling the angel to the ground and pinning it down, just in time to be killed by Albedo. The leader of the Sunlight Scripture, meanwhile, was not at all pleased with what he was seeing. Focus your attention on those two, Negan ordered. Kill them before they can cause any more trouble. No less than 24 angels each descended upon Naruto and Albedo, swarming them both with the intent to kill. Cloud of knives. Naruto shouted as a swirling mass of 1,000 blades materialized around him, slicing his would-be assailants to ribbons. Meanwhile, the ones attacking Albedo did absolutely nothing to her. Every last one of their attacks hit, but she didn't even flinch as she cut them down in droves with her bardage. The northeastern flank is struggling, Millard, Demiurge told him. Also, the man leading that group you're fighting appears to be the one in charge of the whole operation. Thanks for the heads up, Naruto replied. Then, he turned his attention to the warrior captain. Gazeth. Focus on the northeast. You men need help there, we'll finish this group off ourselves. Got it, Gazeth replied, and soon after, once the angels in their way were taken care of, he and his men rode off to deal with the problem. Nodding in approval, the Yako then approached the enemy magic casters, stopping dead in his tracks, right before the thrust of a magic spear would have gone through his head, and slashing the offending angel in half with his sword. He didn't even look at it while doing that either, which had a visible effect on several of the men he faced. Their leader was the exception. "Have you come to plead for your life?" Negan asked him smugly, cackling at the raid before him and his forces. Stopping and looking over his shoulders where Albedo was murdering everything in sight, Naruto returned his gaze to the commander. "Nope," he deadpanned. Then he gave the men before him an uncaring shrug. "You see, I have a budding relationship with those villagers, and I don't appreciate your attempt to massacre them a second time, after I went out of my way to save them from your comrades." Negan looked surprised to hear that. So this guy was able to discern that those men were of the slain theocracy, then. Did he manage to capture one and interrogate him? It was the only thing the priest could think of. "Not sure why you're trying to start a war between the kingdom and the empire," Naruto said, "and I frankly don't give a shit. But I'm a busy man and it pisses off that you'd make me work so hard and take so damn much time out of my day to keep them alive long enough to be useful." "Oh?" Negan raised an eyebrow. "You're acting pretty brazen for a magic caster. What do you intend to do about it?" "I intend to slaughter you like the pigs you are," Naruto declared, dropping his transformation and showing his true form. "I will make you pay for every second you kept me tied down in blood." The sudden change in form and that look in his glowing eyes legitimately startled the forces of the theocracy. It wasn't of rage, but rather disapproval, like what one would expect of a father scolding his child. His declaration and transformation did wonders in intimidating the men, as he'd intended, but again, their leader was unaffected, much to his credit, Naruto had to admit. Negan clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Kill him." The three mages with him started slinging their spells in unison at the apparent demon, as the last of their angels, save for one, swooped in for the kill. Magic arrow. Frostbolt. Holy strike. But try as they might, none of their spells connected, and the angels all similarly failed as the slippery son of a danced around them like it was nothing. Almost none of them could if their lives depended on it, Naruto scoffed in amusement. This build was by far one of his greatest achievements. Despite being a mage-rogue hybrid, Naruto's avatar Kurama was very much a tank of all things, partially because of an ability called Uncanny Dodge, which normally allowed him to add half of his agility to his physical defense. Improved Uncanny Dodge, meanwhile, allowed him to do the same for magical defense. Of course, Naruto was quick to notice that a kitsune with levels in Arcane Trickster gained access to Unearthly Grace, an ability that allowed him to add all of his agility to his defenses instead of just half. In summary, because of Wrath of Jigoku and his utterly broken race class combo, he was free to put very few if any points into these stats, and just increase the others as high as he could, quite obviously focusing on agility. Adding salt to the wound, evasion had a chance to make attacks of any kind, even area of effect spells, miss outright. Improved evasion increased this chance even further to a grand total of 1 in 4, which stacked with the normal chance that came with having a high agility stat. Magic Arrow, because of its effects, was the exception as it always had a 100% chance to hit, but when it did, the spell in question was absorbed by an invisible barrier, that being his greater magic nullification. In short, none of the spells these guys seemed to have had any chance of hurting him. Naruto chuckled as he inched closer and closer, reminiscing about the creative process of this broken-ass build. Upon discovering that Wrath of Jigoku was a thing, it went without saying that he immediately proceeded to abuse the absolute out of it in every way he could get away with, like the power gamer he was. Even the racial bonuses he got to physical attack were not spared, having been reallocated to his agility stat, thanks to an ability called Nimble Warrior. It also helped that he'd learned a lot from examining Bellriver's build before the guy died early, may he rest in peace, and improved on it. That's not to say it was easy, but he managed, partially thanks to R-rantel's input. 6. Pushing his nostalgia aside, Naruto had to admit that he was very intrigued by these people being able to use spells from Yggdrasil. Upon joining the fray, he also immediately recognized the angels as Archangel Flames, which were also distinctly from the game in question. He eyeballed the creatures as they tried to swarm him. The beings in question were seemingly made of porcelain, with wings of golden light. Their jagged visages resembled gold and white suits of armor. There was simply no other thing they could possibly be. The appearance was just that perfect of a mock. And the big one, hovering behind the apparent leader of this group, was clearly a principality of observation, a favorite summon of the paladin whom he tended to butt heads with back in Yggdrasil. It made him wonder if he really was the only player here. Cloud of knives. Naruto shouted, and just like before, the angels were reduced to a fine paste by the blades that appeared, much to the shock of Negan and his fellow mages. It's a trick. It has to be. Technically, yes, Naruto chucked. A magic trick, and for my next one, I'm gonna make you disappear. As he said that, the Yako's grin widened. Ah, there they are, he thought. Before the fight had started, if one could even call it that, he created 5 copies of himself with Cage Bunshin no Jutsu, one of the perks of his ninja class. Then, he cast Perfect Unknowable on them, a spell that makes them invisible, in addition to nullifying their scent and the sounds they make. After having one too many rogues in Yggdrasil hop on his back and stab him in the ears, Naruto made damn sure that every build he made since, including this one, was very good at stealth detection, so he noticed the clones immediately. 7. Of course, the mages weren't idle. Every last one of them started peppering him with spell after spell once again, trying desperately to kill him, but it was all in vain. Then, Albedo appeared before him in a blur of speed, and gave them pause as one of the mages got his head blown off by his own frostbolt. Thanks, Albedo, Naruto said, giving her a welcoming smile. But you didn't need to do that, those guys couldn't hope to hurt me. Forgive me, Lord Ains, she replied, assuming that he wanted to be referred to as such in their presence. But, if they wish to fight you, they should at least be able to best me. These pathetic creatures are like pebbles fighting a mountain. Naruto chuckled warmly, blushing at her words. I'd die of boredom if I had to wait that long, he told her. Negan snarled at that, before turning to the last angel, the strongest one they had. Principality of Observation. Attack. The in question being floated towards Naruto, a massive flanged mace appearing in its hands as it did with a golden flash. But then, several gashes suddenly opened throughout its body, before the angel got anywhere near its target and slowly faded away. What the hell, Negan shouted. Wouldn't you like to KNOW, Naruto teased. Then, with a nod of his head, the shadow clones leapt into action. The dying screams of Negan and his men were like music to his ears. The battle ended soon after. With the assassin's help and Demiurge's input, the remaining attackers didn't stand a chance. And with all of that said and done, Naruto decided to take his time heading back to the village, his vulpine traits hidden once more. Troublesome as that was, I learned a lot about this new world, he commented, eyeballing a crystal he'd extracted from Negan's corpse. I guess it was worth it in the end. It was a sealing crystal that could contain a spell of any level. More specifically, it had a 7th tier summon monster spell contained within. To think they even had items from Yggdrasil in this world. A lot of the answers I got only raised more questions, though, Naruto mused aloud. You seem troubled, Millard, Albedo pointed out. Just thinking is all, the Yako told her. Then, he turned his full attention towards the succubus. Now that everything's calmed down, though, I have a question. I couldn't help but notice that you reacted oddly to me using the name Ainzulgown. Does that bother you? And not at all, she replied, averting her gaze. Come on now, Naruto chuckled warmly. You can be honest with me, I won't be mad at you, I promise. Albedo sighed, stopping mid-stride and frowning deeply beneath her helm. If I offend you in any way, I'll gladly accept any punishment you see fit, she said hesitantly. But I don't like it one bit. I feel like those who abandoned us would object to you using that name. The frown of his own marred Naruto's face as he tucked the crystal away. She was lying, she didn't care what anyone thought, but the way she said the word abandon made a real reason for disliking the name all too clear. That's not true at all, he pointed out, making Albedo flinch. You don't like that name because you resent it for some reason. He was able to tell because of 2 passive skills. The first was named Gather Information. Like Sense Motive, it was a low-level, but very useful ability available to ninja, bards, and rogues, which allowed him to read one's body language and speech patterns like a book, in order to discern various things about the person, such as how they're feeling, personality traits, and other such things. Also like Sense Motive, players were immune to Dingdom, but Naruto was of course rather quick to notice that this ability worked on Gazif and the villagers, and now Albedo, which presumably meant that it would also work on the other Nazarick NPCs. He could also tell that it was somehow far more potent than it was Ingdom, allowing him to discern that she resented the thought of him going by the name Ainzulgown. That shouldn't have been possible, but it apparently was now. As for how he instinctively knew that these abilities were what made him so much better at reading people here than he was in the other real world, Naruto hadn't the foggiest clue, but, somehow, he could just tell. Albedo struggled, trying her best to come up with a response upon being found out, but all she could do was sputter helplessly. Or rather, you actually resent them for leaving. The succubus went utterly stiff, all but confirming it. She tried to come up with a response, but failed once more, and then this attempt was cut short when Naruto pulled her into a hug. I'm sorry, he said. I feel that way too, at times. But they didn't leave because they wanted to, they did it because they had to, even Tabula-san, and Momonga-senpai. 8. Even with her face completely covered, the succubus visibly taken aback by how winded her love sounded. Albedo quickly hugged him back, holding the kitsune tight. I am so sorry if I brought back any unpleasant memories, she said. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Albedo, I'm supposed to be the one comforting you, here, Naruto chuckled warmly, thoroughly amused. Thank you, though. I appreciate it, and no, you didn't make me uncomfortable at all. Behind her helmet, the succubus smiled warmly at that, and the two of them just stood there for a moment, enjoying each other's embrace. Eventually, though, they did return, and when the villagers saw them, Naruto and Albedo were lavished with all manner of praise. The latter was more than a little irritated by the sight of half a dozen young maidens swooning over her love, but she said nothing and tried her best to stay compass. Lord Kurama had plans for the village, after all, and she didn't want to get in the way of that by acting out. Besides, it was to be expected. Anyone would fantasize about being with the Supreme One, after all, that was only natural. As for Naruto himself, he couldn't help but be humbled by it all. The man behind the fox was not at all used to being treated in such a way. Then, his attention was pulled away from that by Gazef, looking a little banged up, but in good health otherwise. Approaching him, Naruto greeted the warrior captain with a friendly smile. "Glad you made it through the day," he said. "How are you holding up?" "Well enough," Gazef replied with a tired smile. He lost more than half of his men in that fight, but if it weren't for Ains and his wife, none of them would be around anymore, and this village would no longer be standing. "I have no idea how to repay you for saving my life, and this village twice, no less. But, feel free to look for me in the royal capital if you ever need anything. I'll hold you up to that," Naruto chuckled good-naturedly. "I have no idea what plans you have," Gazef said. "But would you mind traveling with us back to the capital? We could use some adventurers of your skill level." "Unfortunately, I'll have to decline for now," Naruto told him. "I have some friends nearby who are probably worried sick about me. It's too late to go out right now, though," a familiar feminine voice told them. Enri approached the trio, eager to thank a certain Redeed once again for his help. "The monsters of the Great Forest are far more restless at night." She turned to Naruto and continued, her cheeks starting to burn. "Why you and your wife cannot stay at my place if you want." Naruto took a moment to weigh his options. It would raise some awkward questions if he just slink off into the night, questions he'd rather not deal with the next time he came here. But at the same time, everyone here appeared to think he was some measure of nobility. That being said, it would also be weird if he didn't play the part. "It's a kind offer," he said politely, "but I don't want to impose." "It's fine," she insisted. "After everything you've done for us, for me especially, it's the least I could do." "Well, if you insist," he replied with a warm chuckle. "Who am I to say no to such a pretty face?" And he turned betrayed at that, while Albedo was immeasurably grateful that no one could see her face right now. The flicks could kill. Gazef looked rather amused by the exchange. Apparently, a certain someone was looking to make this girl a concubine, after living with an ability for so long, though he wasn't one to judge. While the practice was uncommon in Riest's eyes, it wasn't unheard of. 9. Again, the warrior captain said, "Feel free to seek me out if ever you're at the capital." "Will do," the Yako chirped, before turning to his companion. "Let's go, Albedo." As you wish," the succubus muttered hesitantly. It took every ounce of self-control she had for her not to growl those words. The next day, however, back in the throne room of Nazarick, Albedo was as happy as a clam. Despite her initial feelings about staying the night with that insignificant worm who was clearly trying to seduce her love, there was a spring in the succubus's step after she got to actually sleep with Lord Kurama. Granted, all they did was cuddle, but still. Albedo giggled lewdly, leering at her love and squirming about like a horny schoolgirl. Naruto couldn't help but blush at that. Truth be told, he came so close to her bowleg when spending the night at Enri's. And the man behind the fox knew damn well that if he had given in to said temptation, 2 more girls would have been deflowered that night. Taking a deep calming breath and doing his best to ignore the raging boner, Naruto returned to the book he'd been flipping through. The ancient mystical-looking tome in question was the Encyclopedia of Yggdrasil, previously owned by Unforeseen before he and his sister left the game. Given how close he and that unapologetic, self-proclaimed degenerate were, it shouldn't have come as a surprise that Unforeseen had entrusted him with deleting the more questionable info, if Naruto ever quit the game himself. But it did. Naruto was so flattered by how much trust that man had shown. They really were the best of friends. Realizing that he'd gotten distracted again, Naruto pushed those thoughts aside for another time, and returned his attention to the encyclopedia once more. Continuing to flip through the pages, he came to the Oni section, and it was therein that he found the cause of his irritation. Oni. Not to be confused with the more specific ogre-like creatures commonly associated with this term, the word Oni in Yggdrasil is in reference to the original, more nebulous meaning, making them the poster child of heteromorphs. Basically, to be an Oni is to be the living antithesis of humanity itself, to be driven by the desire to rape, pillage, murder, conquer your mother, and/or consume human flesh, possibly among other things, in no particular order. All things considered, they are one of the most criminally underused races for herb, especially because their reservations are on par with what you'd expect from a succubus. Aim-wise, this anti-humanism is why a karma rating of -300 or lower is required to take on levels in this racial class. It's also why your karma rating drops to -500 when gain a level in this class and can never go any higher. The females of this race, known as Kaiho, tend to be physically weaker, but generally sport a stronger affinity for demonic magic, which is why their level cap in demonic sorcerer is 10 instead of 5. 10. On a side note, the ladies of this race also have some wonderful femdom potential, and the horns of their more ogre-like versions tend to make for lovely handlebars. That whole entry was Unforeseen at his finest. Naruto stopped halfway, though, since it only contained more impertinent information from there, such as how to unlock the class, recommended combinations, and which herb fantasies would be best suited for them. He couldn't help but smile at the shoutouts in there, though. It probably shouldn't have come as a surprise, given that he was single-handedly responsible for most of the information in this entry being discovered, but it did, and it was very flattering. Explains a lot, Naruto muttered, his smile fading as he mulled over the information. Though his karma rating was as low as it could go, he figured that it wasn't the only cause. Being evil, in and of itself, didn't necessarily equal the willingness, let alone the desire, to rape a 10-year-old girl and her wounded sister in the woods, after all. Then again, his character was literally as evil as could be, so it's entirely possible that his levels in the Oni class only added fuel to the fire. He'd have to check with his daughters about that later on. Regardless, it was annoying. 11. Millard? Albedo asked, looking concerned. You seem displeased. Is something wrong? Just mildly irritated, Naruto admitted. The whole time I was in that village, I was fighting the temptation to rape and pillage. He let out a tired sigh. Needless to say, giving in would have made my goals a lot harder than they needed to be, but it was especially hard to resist having my way with some of those girls. Just as Albedo was about to say something, Shaltier spoke up, making her presence known while she entered the throne room. If it's that much of an issue, the vampire said, I'd gladly serve as your outlet. I may not look like it, but I'm quite the masochist, so you don't have to worry about being a little ROUGH. Albedo snarled at her, while Naruto gave Shaltier a sheepish chuckle. It's a kind offer, he replied awkwardly. He really meant it, though. But, well, the people of Nazarick are all precious to me, the Yako continued. Everyone here, yourself included, is the closest thing to a family I have left, so I'd feel really guilty for treating you like that. Unfortunately, his words only left Shaltier more willing to let him, while Albedo swooned at how pure and sincere he was being. Naruto cleared his throat, practically reading them both like the book in his lap. Thanks for the offer, though, he said, focusing on the vampire once more. That aside, I take it you're here to issue a report. I am, Shaltier replied, giving her lord a curtsy. In total, we managed to snatch up 3 survivors, one of whom was of high rank. They are awaiting interrogation in the frozen prison. Good, Naruto chirped. In hindsight, I'm a little irritated with myself for killing their leader, since he would have been a valuable target. It's nice that we at least grabbed someone of high rank, though. I trust that Uranus will be more careful this time. Oh, she most definitely will, Shaltier assured. She was rather apologetic for overestimating that first one's durability, in fact. But to know, Naruto said with a grin. I don't mind mistakes too much, as long as you learn from them. Depends on how big they are, of course, but that was a fairly small one on her part. Both Shaltier and Albedo smiled at that. Anything else? Naruto asked, looking at both women. The shadow demons have reported nothing amiss lately, Albedo chimed in. There was an ogre they dealt with a while back, but that was about it. It didn't seem to be heading for Karn per se, but Lord Kurama had plans for said village, so they didn't take any chances. Also, she continued, that gear those men were wearing had no major enchantments. We put it all in the low-tier section of Nazarick's treasury until further notice. I'll check it out later, Naruto said with a nod of approval. I want to learn as much about this world as possible. Is there anything we should do about this Gazif and his men? Shaltier asked, just to be sure. Leave them be for now, the Yako told her. We don't want to cause any trouble if we can avoid it. Too risky if we don't know what we're getting into. As you wish, both women replied in unison. With that out of the way, though, Naruto added, you two, Mare and Cocytus, all found yourselves working for much longer than I was intending. It's fine, Millard, Shaltier told him with a smile. We are all delighted to serve you, Albedo chimed in. Naruto gave them a warm, but sheepish chuckle at that. Still, though, I feel the need to reward the 4 of you for your dedication. Looking down thoughtfully at the book he was holding, he slammed it shut and held it out towards Shaltier. Might as well start with you, he said. This was owned by R-rantel. He made me promise to erase around half of its contents before giving it to someone else, but I'm sure he'd gladly make an exception with you. The vampire's expression was one of utter shock. That felt like far too much for what little she did. She struggled to say something, anything, but the poor thing was just so overwhelmed. Go on, he said, chuckling warmly. I insist. Shaltier gingerly grasped the book. She felt her eyes start to burn, but pushed back the tears. Then, she hugged it close, as if it were her most prized possession. Be a dear and fetch Mare and Cocytus. Will I give Albedo her reward, he said, causing the succubus in question to perk up. The vampire, meanwhile, nodded, turned on her heel, and ran the hell out of there before she could do something improper. I like seeing girls get all flustered way more than I should, Naruto commented, eliciting a giggle from Albedo. While he couldn't blame his classes in Oni for that trait, the Redeed couldn't help but wonder if they enhanced it. 12. Questions for later. Clearing his throat, Naruto then turned his attention to Albedo. Once I'm done here, he said. I want you to summon the remaining floor guardians minus Gargantua. Let him sleep. Of course, Millard, she replied with a bow. Nodding, he smiled at the succubus. Now, as for your reward, deep within a mighty castle seemingly carved from one giant, solid piece of white marble, 3 women were gathered at a long, rectangular table covered in a black, gold, and purple silken cloth. The room seemed to be made of white marble and obsidian, black pillars contrasting nicely against the white stone, black banners with gold accents sporting their guild crest, a purple mushroom decorating the walls. Two large, highly ornate purple heart and black velvet chairs sat at either end of the table, the sides both lined with 9 oaken, but still quite fancy chairs. Once upon a time, all 20 of the seats had been filled, but now, they were all that remained of their precious guild, the cult of the Purple Smurf. Needless to say, their previous guildmaster never took the game all that seriously. Hell, he'd have called it the cult of the Purple Shroom if he could, but that was one character too long, so he made do. When he passed the torch, falling to the kryptonite of all nerds, the dreaded Glorious Puspus, and thus quitting the game, their new guildmaster had never bothered to change that name, as it had grown on her by then. 1. The guild's foremost pro player, Boudica, was the one who had assumed the role. Said woman sat at the head of the table as was to be expected. Her wavy blood-red locks hung freely behind her, parted on the side and pushed behind one ear, with the help of a silver hair clip. Her armor was a class of platykini highly customized to flaunt the hot-ass, well-toned, well-endowed body she had, and was very proud of her almost 30 years ago. Which meant that she looked 13, and that was not at all creepy, not in the slightest. Ahem. The armor was black and red in color with silver accents, sporting full-fingered gauntlets, heeled sabatons and leg plates in the form of metallic thigh-high boots connected to her belt with chains to form pseudo-garters, a lightly padded plate brasserie connected to her shoulders, a thong, and a mostly black silken cape. An ornate arming sword and gladius were on her belt, and the kite shield she typically donned was currently in her inventory for convenience. Her crimson eyes bore a tired look as she let out a heavy sigh. To her right was a busty dark elf with chocolate skin, amber eyes, and pink hair. She wore a black and dark red, headed cloak over her black leather bra, and a matching skirt that could only be described as a long, silken loincloth, given how little it covered in front. To go with that, she sported a pair of leather, thigh-high boots with shin guards, and some fine, leather gloves under her vambraces. Finally, hanging loosely on her belt, she had 3 matching longswords with varying abilities. This was Mabuki, a player who unapologetically pushed the limits on what manner of behavior was allowed in him. Boudica had always wondered how the man behind that elf had yet to get himself banned and arrested, but he apparently found a way. Finally, on the left side of the table, further down, was a second human, this one sporting long golden locks, brown eyes, and freckled cheeks. Some of the woman's hair was pulled back to keep it out of her face, and her attire was more traditionally elf-like green in color, earthy, and functional, donning a green vest, matching trousers, a green cloak, thick armored brown leather gloves, and a pair of heavy, armored boots. She was quite thoroughly the most modestly dressed member of the trio, though that was not saying much to be fair. She wore nothing under the vest and displayed a generous amount of side boob and cleavage as a result, but that was about it. Her name was Artemis, a classic role player who based her character off of the Greek goddess in question. She was also Boudica's second in command, so the fancy chair on the other end was her actual seat. But, in a guild with 3 members, that rank was rather unnecessary to be honest. Hard to believe it's all coming to an end, Mabuki commented. Her voice was low-pitched for a woman, but still distinctly feminine, tailored by her creator to be silky smooth and alluring. 2. Yeah, Artemis sighed. I'm going to miss it so much. We all are, Boudica assured. When the women spoke, their lips didn't move. This was one of the more unsettling aspects of Yggdrasil, but said game's players learned to get used to it over time. You especially, I bet, Mabuki commented. Yeah, the Reddit admitted. Truth be told, this game was highly therapeutic for her. Mostly because it allowed her to play a glorified game of house better than any other. As it turned out, the woman in question still mourned for the loss of her baby, though her situation was not quite as morbid as that wording would have one believe. You should head to your room and see her while you still have a chance, Artemis told her. We'll be sticking around until the end too, I'm sure. Definitely, Mabuki chirped. Probably gonna be taking one last tour of the place, myself. Alright, the Reddit replied with a smile. I'll talk to you two later, then. With that, she got up and headed back to her quarters. The sound of Boudica's heels echoing throughout the halls filled her ears as she approached the solar. The room in question was nothing short of huge. A large decorated hearth sat in the middle of a luxurious lounge, and the purple heart floors contrasting rather nicely against the white marble walls. The second floor stopped halfway to make the lounge feel much bigger, sporting a 2-level library which housed the guild's vault, and the 2 doors on either side of the fireplace lead to a pair of bedrooms. On the left was Boudica's and on the right was that of the girl she came here to visit. Opening the floor to said bedroom, she was greeted with the sight of an NPC sheet, painstakingly customized as best she could in memory of her long-lost baby boy. Unfortunately for Boudica, she was raised by a single mother, so she had no idea what her father looked like. Also, she got knocked up in middle school by one of 3 guys, so discerning what her son would look like at the time was all but impossible. Still, though, making a daughter was close enough for Boudica. The girl in question was a half-elf blonde with blue eyes and whisker-like birthmarks. She looked to be about 19, since that was how old her brother would have been at the time of her creation, the first time around. The girl's hair was done up in 2 long pigtails and side-swept bangs, and she was garbed in some of the best healer's gear in the game. This NPC was named Mito, after her creator's deceased mother. "Hey, honey," Boudica greeted warmly. The automated girl graced her mother with a smile. "Hey, mama," she replied. "How's your day been?" Of course, the sight of a teenager calling a girl who looked so much younger than her mama had resulted in many of her guildmates teasing Boudica on more than one occasion, but she didn't mind. It was all in good fun, after all. Pushing those thoughts aside, a smile spreading across the Redeed's face as Boudica sat down right next to her creation. "It's been rough," she said, "but I'm happy to be home." Back in his room, Naruto looked in the mirror, multiple items and outfits strewn about the floor from his experiments with passing himself off as an adventurer. With him were 2 women. One was that maid whom he thanked before the servers shut down, the blonde with the pink eyes. The girl was named Kokoro and she was a homunculus, just like her 40 sisters, a living construct made from alchemy. As was the case for most of them, she was made to look human. To be more specific, she had the appearance of a woman in her early 20s, at least from what he could see. Truth be told, he was tempted to have her stripped to make sure for academic purposes. But he resisted. Still, though she was really cute and wouldn't mind, right? She was happy to see him when he approached, sputtering shyly and so adorably. She wants him, too badly. Surely, it's okay if she's willing. "Shut up." Naruto sighed, silencing the voice in his head once more. The other was Albedo Beta of the Pleiades. Her outfit stood out a bit more among the maids, not just because of the armor, but because of its general design. The skirt was longer for one, with a slit all the way up to her hip, and instead of the frilly headdress most maids donned, this one wore a silken cap to hide her dog-like ears. The woman had tan skin, amber eyes and her thick crimson locks done up in a pair of long, giant braided pigtails. A massive scepter with Nordic themes was slung across her back. "It might be easier to pass myself off as a mage than a rogue, given the low-level gear we have available," the kitsune told himself, shedding yet another set of gear, and making the 2 maids blush at his nearly nude form, as well as attend to certain something was making in his undergarments. Albedo in particular was salivating, the ginger maid's primal instincts almost getting the better of her. But she resisted. Kokoro, meanwhile, got the hint and handed her master a wizard's robe. The item in question was the robe of hellfire, mostly black in color, with orange, white and yellow fiery accents. This one was also imbued with a quick change gem. So, if shit were ever to hit the fan because he encountered a few too many high-level monsters out there, he could switch back into his top gear and wreck some shit. As the name implied, it would enhance his more splody spells to help Naruto pass himself off as a pyromancer or some such. It also gave him immunity to fire, which might be useful, depending on how commonly he'd have to deal with enemy fire mages. In his experiences, they were among the most common in games and other fantasy settings, which made sense. Not only did fire have a more badass feel to it, but in a world like this one, it would be far easier to abuse, especially for someone with enough knowledge in chemistry. 3. "Looks good on ya, Millard," Albedo chirped, a cheerful grin on her face. Naruto chuckled and gave her an appreciative nod, before turning to the mirror once more and experimenting with his shapeshifting. The first thing he did was retract his vulpine traits to look human once more. But, the whole point of doing this was to take on a different identity in hopes of avoiding attention while learning more about this world and scouting the area in the guise of an adventurer. So, the first thing he tried was his real face. His hair shortened a bit and turned blonde while his eyes changed to blue. "Too similar," he commented. Then, he made a more drastic change to see what that would look like. His hair lengthened and his features softened. He then became much shorter, curvier, bustier. When he was done, Naruto found himself eyeballing a woman about 14 or so in the mirror. Her voice was also much more feminine as he took in the new appearance. Of course, the robe changed with him to accommodate this new form, turning into more of a dress. It was now very open in front, showing off a rather excessive amount of her bosom, while slits formed up the sides, all the way up to her hips, totally just for the sake of mobility. The boots and trousers he was wearing with it also changed, the former now reaching up to her mid-thigh, while the latter turned into a garterbelt and stockings. Staring at the whisker marks, Naruto realized that someone might ask if this girl is the sister of Ainzulgaon or something. That might be harmless, but passing his new form off as being completely unrelated would make for less unnecessary questions, so he made them disappear, and had a beauty mark form under the girl's right eye. "Maybe this'll work," Naruto asked, tilting her head curiously. No one would guess that this chick was Ainzulgaon, hero of Karn village, but was it necessary to take his disguise this far? Maybe not. He turned to Albedo and asked, "What do you think? It looks so cute." The Redeed giggled, gingerly reaching up and waving her hand above Naruto's head to feel for something that should be there. "So this is an actual shape-shifting ability. Amazing, no one will be able to see past his, even her sense of smell was fooled." She had to admit, it was very impressive. Naruto's new form now stood a whole head shorter than that of Albedo, with a heart-shaped face, wide hips, and a modest bust. She looked about 14 or so, the apparent age of adulthood in this world. Naruto gave her a warm chuckle at that. She'd probably say that regardless, but he took the compliment and looked back to the mirror. Now to give this face a name, for he thought about it for a moment, and the first thing he came up with was the name of his mother. Though he'd never met her, he knew her name as it was on his birth certificate. Kushina, he chirped. Uzahem Kushina Uzumaki. Being Japanese, Naruto was still getting used to the more Western order names they used here, but it was only a minor inconvenience. It was a good name and it was the perfect cover for this disguise. What were the chances of there being someone out there being able to trace it back to him? Minimal. Hell, he'd go so far as to call it impossible. That's a very pretty name, Lord Kurama, Kokoro chimed in. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Naruto nodded to himself before smiling at the blonde. It was my mother's. The Pusargina perked up when she heard that, now very curious, but said nothing at least for now. Now, for a good staff, the disguised kitsune mused aloud. The tow-headed maid nodded and gathered several that she'd brought here from their treasury at his behest. The now disguised kitsune reached out and cast a spell to help him choose the best one for his build. Identify. It was one of the very few divination spells he knew, one that could, as the name suggests, discern the properties of something specifically of the magical variety. It was pretty weak, only working on potions, weapons, and armor, and any effects that the user has yet to unlock would remain hidden. But, as a trade-off, it was able to appraise multiple magical items with a single casting, so the spell had its uses. Thus, Naruto took a staff in either hand, inspecting and comparing them. Then, setting one aside, he checked to see how another stacked up to the one he still held and kept at it, until the best match for his little disguise was found. But, before heading out into the world, there were a pair of certain someones he needed to check on first. Now back in his true form and divine class gear, Naruto found himself wandering the wasteland that was Nazarick's 8th floor. By his side was Victim, serving as his guide. Princess Yumiko has been quite restless as of late, the fetal angel commented. She is often complaining about having nothing to do. Figured she would. She gets bored so easily, Naruto chuckled. He'd seen that coming from a mile away, given how he'd written her to be. It's why I'm here. The poor thing would probably go insane if I didn't give her something to do while I'm gone. Speaking of, PAPAA. The black, white and pink blur hit Naruto dead center, and he found himself skidding across the wasteland from the force of a certain NPC's tackle. The girl in question was a pale-skinned one with pink hair done up in messy pigtails, the bangs framing her face. She had a single horn in the center of her forehead, curving upwards, and her ears were pointed, both making it clear that she was not human. To be more specific, she was a Kaiho female Oni. Unlike Naruto, however, she was of the more modern ogre-like variety mentioned in Unforeseen's encyclopedia. Her attire was that of a fully armored samurai, minus the helm and face mask black, white, and pink in color, with a white tiger pelt around her waist. Hello, Fumiko-chan, Naruto chuckled. Sorry about that, boss, another feminine voice grumbled. Damn girls got no chill. The one who spoke was a dark-skinned, young woman who looked to be between 14 to 16 or so, a flat look of disapproval in her slit glowing amber eyes. She was irradiated with black sclera, her crimson locks hanging freely all the way down to her well-toned ass with messy, semi-short bangs partially covering her face. 5 bone white horns formed a crown upon her head, one in the center, right on top, while the others jaggedly shot outward and forward. Though the other girl's armor hid it, this one was far more lithe than petite, with a smaller bosom. Her attire was also more akin to that of a caster as she sported a full, black, white and red kimono, with a black sash and tabi, and traditional zari. The robe was mostly red, sporting a fiery motif, and a silver flute was tucked into her sash, serving as the only hint that she was more specifically a bard. Like the Pinkette, she too was a Kaiho. It's fine, Taiya-chan, Naruto assured her with a warm chuckle. The enthusiasm's kinda endearing. Besides, I'm here to talk to you too, so this saves time, anyways. When designing the defenses of the 8th floor, Ainzulgaon entrusted the task to the guild's power gamers, including him. To be more specific, as one of the guild's foremost experts on crowd control and exploitative mothery, he was tasked with creating the CC specialist and a bulky DPS, the latter of whom could double as an emergency tank, if needed for the kill squad they called the 8th floor hierarchy. Of course, the blonde turned Redeed helped with other things, serving as the primary consultant on one of the other members, for example, and Naruto decided that when he was done with them, he should give his creations a bit more personality. Thus, the first one he created was written as a hot-blooded, excitable troublemaker, eager to prove herself to Papa. Then, he named her Fumiko, ironically spelling said name with the kanji for disciplined child, because he found it funny. The suggestion came from Unforeseen, and upon hearing it, Naruto simply couldn't name her anything else. The second, meanwhile, was more chill, but grumpy, with a sailor's tongue and a tendency to call him boss. Naruto wasn't sure why, but he thought it would be cute, and wasn't disappointed when she did precisely that. Boo. Fumiko perked up at that. What do you want to talk about? Like her sister Taiya, the Pinkette had glowing amber eyes with black sclera and slit pupils, and hers were wide with curiosity and excitement. That's something for you to do so your boredom doesn't drive you and everyone else insane while I'm out and about. He chuckled again, giving his older-looking creation a hug. What is it? What is it? Fumiko asked, looking up at Papa with a sparkle in her eyes. Do I get to break someone's allegiance? 5. Taya groaned, fighting back the headache that threatened to form. You could say that, Naruto replied awkwardly. Just make sure you behave, okay? Of course, PAPA. For some reason, Fumiko's sincerity wasn't reassuring in the slightest, but he took her word for it. About an hour later, at around 8 AM or so, Kushina Uzumaki and her childhood friend, Regina, were traveling towards a road to R-rantel. It was quite a ways south of Nazarick, but they weren't bothered at all by it. To go with his new attire, Naruto had on a magic circlet which would protect him from mind control effects and telepathy. Meanwhile, his staff would allow him to maximize one fire spell per day, without actually using the metamagic ability in question, and thus not increasing its mana cost in the process. It also increased the range of his fire spells. Regina, meanwhile, was now garbed in more priestly attire, consisting of a white cloak and a black and white robe. Her massive conspicuous scepter was swapped out for a more traditional staff, albeit with a stabby bit at the end for it to double as a spear. She did retain her hat though, since it concealed her doggy ears. Lord Regina began. Naruto turned to face her, wagging a finger in front of her. It's Kushina now. Kushina. Understood. Yes, Kushina. Naruto sighed. We're gonna have to work on that, won't we? Regina rubbed the back of her head, laughing nervously. My apologies, I'm just not used to referring to you so casually is all. It feels weird, you know. Everyone seems to feel that way. Can't say I blame anyone though. So you were saying. Regina perked up at that. Right. She chuckled sheepishly. I almost forgot, so if you don't mind me asking, I'm curious about your mother. Naruto shrugged. Sorry, but I can't help you there, never got to know her. Regina flinched. My apologies. Don't sweat it, Naruto chuckled, politely waving her words off. You couldn't have known unless you asked. Regina didn't know what to say, resulting in long, but somewhat comfortable silence washed over the two before Naruto broke it, squinting at some commotion in the distance. Is that a caravan? Looks like it, Regina commented, leaning over Naruto, completely oblivious to the disguised Yako turning beat-rat as he felt her tits against his head. Looks like one of their wagons broke. Oh, you can see with that much detail from here. Regina nodded proudly, still draped over the pseudo-blonde. Yup, YUP. Very interesting, Naruto said. Let's check it out, then. This is a perfect opportunity to find out more about the area and maybe the Empire, seeing how they appear to be coming from there. Merchants tend to know a lot, after all. And with that, the two of them headed on down to meet with the caravan. Hey there, one of the men called out, noticing two young maidens approaching. What brings you here? The guy in question was a large, middle-aged man with a mustache and a prominent gut, garbed in simple but nice clothes. He was clearly no peasant, but still a far cry from nobility. Hello, Naruto chirped, giving the man a charming grin. My friend and I were heading to R-rantel after a bit of exploration further north, and we noticed that you were stuck. Oh that? The man gave him a hearty laugh. It's nothing two young ladies like you should worry yourselves about. Thank you for the concern, though. Don't mention it, Naruto giggled. I'm Kushina Uzumaki, by the way, and this is Regina. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Miss Uzumaki, Naruto clarified, quickly getting the hint. You can call me Kushina, though, he added with a smile and a curtsy. I'm Doman, the man replied. And that over there is my son, Cashew. He waved a hand towards, before shouting, Oi, boy. Have some manners and come greet these two. 6. When the boy finally ran over, and noticed the two denizens of Nazarick, he almost fell over, managing to recover from his stumble in the last second. Blushing for a moment, he laughed at himself before approaching Naruto with an arm offered in a handshake. Sorry for that. I'm Cashew. Naruto took the hand and shook it gently, a kind smile on his face. Pleased to meet you, Cashew, he chirped. I'm Kushina. And I'm Regina, Regina added, leaning over Naruto and giving the young man a two-fingered salute. Of course, Naruto blushed hard at her breasts being right back on his head again. So, where are you guys heading, if you don't mind me asking? Same place you are, actually, Doman said with a smile. This road only leads to R-rantel. You can feel free to hop in the back when we get the carriage fixed if you want. Can't have two cuties like you taking such a long trip all alone. Really now? Naruto asked eagerly, playing the part of an honest, curious maiden. If they tried anything, he knew the two of them could murder Everlast one of these guys, and steal their shit, so safety was of no concern at the moment. That would be wonderful. Thank you, sir. With that and a nod, Doman got back to work on the carriage. While that was going down, Naruto spent the time they waited talking with Cashew, getting on his good side, and taking full advantage of the boy's obvious crush on his disguise. It didn't take nearly as long as they thought it would for the caravan to start moving again. Soon enough, Naruto was making some moves on Cashew, interrogating him about everything of interest the young boy knew of their destination. The boy, blushing at the attention of such a fair beauty, told them everything he knew over the next few days. The mighty city of R-rantel was quite an impressive sight, Naruto had to admit. It didn't compare to some of the more fantastical ones he'd seen in Yggdrasil, but the more down-to-earth grandeur made it seem more real, more tangible, while those flying cities and such felt more like a dream. Sitting on the crossroads of three major trade routes, the settlement was second only to Riestize's royal capital in terms of grandeur, at least according to Cashew. The young man knew quite a bit about it, in fact, being surprisingly well-traveled for his age. It was legitimately impressive. That being said, the city itself was remarkably huge, protected by three concentric walls with the most up-to-date battlements money could buy. Behind the innermost wall was the administrative heart and military headquarters, raised up by a natural hill, so as to wreak havoc on anyone who managed to get past the first two lines of defense. Between the next and outermost wall was a buffer zone, a first line of defense, filled to the brim with barracks, training grounds, and military storage facilities. Finally, nestled between R-rantel's heart and the buffer zone sat the city proper. "Thank you so much for the ride," Naruto chirped. "I definitely owe you one. Don't mention it, young lady. Not only is it a man's duty to help, but Cashew's been needing someone to talk to for the longest time. His enjoyment is all the pay I need." Naruto nodded understandingly, giving Doman a charming smile. "It was my pleasure." He then turned towards Lupus Regina, who was eyeballing the soldiers as they passed through the second gate. "Regina, we should go on our own from here." "Sure thing, Kushina," the Redite answered. Soon after, the carriage stopped and the two of them were helped off, a fidgeting Cashew looking disappointed that Naruto was leaving. "Be safe, Kushina," he called out. Naruto turned and blew the boy a kiss, before sauntering off with Lupus Regina in tow. As soon as he was out of earshot, though, the disguised Yauko and his companion ducked into a nearby alley so he could vent. "Phew, I feel so dirty. This disguise might be more trouble than it's worth." "Not into guys?" Lupus Regina asked with a teasing grin. "Hell no," Naruto grunted. "Half tempted to just drop the look and stick my dick into the nearest hot chick, just to cleanse myself." At that, Lupus Regina gave him a sadistic grin. "Shall I round up some cuties for you to choose from?" Well, that knocked him right out of his funk, and the appeal made him just a teensy bit concerned. Maybe Narble would have been a better choice after all. No need, he muttered, "there's too many people around to try something like that." The werewolf frowned at that, looking confused, but nodded after a moment of thought. Now that he mentioned it, while humans were laughably weak and she herself was a healer, they were surrounded by thousands of the creatures, several of whom were highly trained and heavily armed. There was no telling what might happen if they got caught. "All right," she muttered, averting her gaze. "My apologies." "Don't sweat it," he said. "You were just trying to help and it was kinda cute." Well, the thought was, at least though Naruto could have done without the mental images, he appreciated her efforts to please him. Lupus Regina stared at him long and hard, blinking owlishly and feeling her cheeks start to burn. "Ah, thanks." Naruto threw his hand over her shoulders, pulling the woman close. "See? You're already talking to me like a normal person. I'm proud." The poor AD only blushed harder at that. While she herself was a notorious tease, Lupus Regina was not at all used to being on the receiving end of that shit. 7. "Ah, you so adorable," he cooed, leaning in closer, and the disguised man couldn't keep the grin off his face when she started sputtering out of sheer embarrassment. Unfortunately for her, that reaction only made him want to keep it up. But, alas, all good things had to come to an end eventually. Naruto had something more important to do. Eventually letting up on the poor, sputtering cutie, he poked his head out of the alley and looked around with a thoughtful hum. "Now, if I was a guild, where would I set up shop?" He then approached one of the guards and decided to ask for directions. "Excuse me, sir," he called out. "I'm new here. How far away is the business center?" It's not far at all, actually. Just keep heading down that road right there." He pointed at one to their left. Naruto smiled at him and gave the guard a curtsy. "Thank you." The guard blinked, staring for a moment before his fellow nudged him with a chuckle. Giving the man in question an annoyed look, he readdressed Naruto to respond, only to see that the caster girl was already gone. Not even 5 minutes later, Naruto and Lupus Regina were at their destination. Apparently, R-rantel had several plazas, but this one was by far the biggest. It was filled with stalls and workshops, selling all manner of goods and services. A very familiar pair of young, fair maidens turned many a head therein as they bounced around this stall, and that, mostly selling a good chunk of the gear Naruto and Ora had looted from those soldiers of the slain theocracy. Then, they made a beeline for the guild hall to register themselves as the magic caster, Kushina Uzumaki, and the cleric Regina. Naruto and Lupus Regina emerged from the hall an hour later and sought a place to stay. Of course, in the process of their registration, he and his companion both realized to their dismay that neither of them could read the written language of this world. They both hid it well, though, and the whole thing went by without a hitch, thanks to Naruto cheesing it with an ability called Decipher Script. It wasn't a perfect solution as he only got a rough understanding of what those scribbles said, but in the end, the two of them now sported necklaces with copper plates to signify their rank as rookies. 8. The pseudo-blonde looked around. According to the receptionist, there was an inn nearby, and as luck would have it, something that looked like one sat only a few buildings away from the guild hall. So, he opted to try there first. As it turned out, he was right, and upon entering, Naruto found himself a rather filthy-looking establishment. The ground floor was a dining hall of sorts, sporting a bar in the back with several round tables throughout. A spiral staircase led to the next level from the center of this room, and an empty fireplace beyond it presumably served as the primary source of heat when winter came. Most of the patrons here were male, as one would expect, and the atmosphere was extremely tense, the constant threat of violence hanging in the air. Despite how many people were here, though, it didn't feel too crowded as the room itself was quite spacious. But the eyes of damn near everyone here upon him and Regina since the instant they entered, as if sizing them up, and it left Naruto on edge. Taking a deep breath, he pushed aside the urge to show these little shits their real place in the packing order, and addressed the man in a dirty apron, mopping up a sizable red stain that clearly hadn't come from wine. He was huge, looking far more like a bouncer than the innkeeper, despite his age. The large burly arms exposed by his rolled-up sleeves were covered in scars, his head was shaved clean, many more scars could be seen upon his face, and his steely eyes bore the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen some shit. Behind the old man, in a frame upon the pillar that held up the stairs, hung a necklace with a golden plate. "Fear the old man in a profession where most die young," Naruto quoted under his breath. "Wise words, princess," the man grunted. "I'll give you that much credit. What are you looking for?" "My friend and I would like to share a room for the night," Naruto told him with a polite smile. 5 coppers, the innkeeper said. "Food's usually oatmeal and vegetables. Might be getting days-old bread instead of the oatmeal, though. Meat's an extra copper." "We'll go for the meat as well, then," Naruto chirped. The man snorted rudely. "You've got guts, princess," he told the disguised kitsune. "But there are 3 inns that cater to adventurers here and mine's the worst. You know why they sent you here?" Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, only causing the man to frown in disapproval. Truth be told, both he and Regina knew full well that the receptionist was hiding some manner of ill intent, but they weren't quite sure as to why just yet. "I don't know what noble house you're from," the innkeeper said, "but this is the real world, princess, and they're trying to give you a taste of it. The people who stay here are mostly copper and iron plates, so you'll be able to form a party that matches your strength here if you're lucky." His tone implied that it was a very big if, too. Then, the old man shrugged. "It's fine if you want to stay in the room, but if you don't make contracts here, you won't be able to find more party members. If you can't form a balanced party, then you will die. That said, it's advised for novices with no comrades to advertise themselves in places with more people. So, will it be a room or the dorms, princess?" Naruto blinked at that. This guy obviously thought he was nobility for some reason, but at the same time, he was also looking out for them in his own way. The pseudo-blonde plastered on a charming smile and gave his answer. "Room for now," he said. "I'm a girl who doesn't know whom to trust quite yet, after all, so I have safety concerns in other departments, if you will." Of course, that battle with the sunlight scripture made it clear that they wouldn't get anywhere near him before dying horribly and possibly getting eaten by Regina, but it was better to be safe than sorry. For her sake more than his. "I'll need to see which one's safer for myself before I make that decision in the long run, and it's getting kinda late," Naruto continued, giving the man a curtsy. "Thanks for your concern, though." The innkeeper huffed at that. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," he admitted, "I'll give you that. Don't lose it out there. 6 coppers, then." Naruto handed him the payment in question, and the man went back to cleaning after handing him a key. "Them's the first one on your right once you get up the stairs," the innkeeper grunted. "Thank you with that." Naruto headed towards the stairs. But then, someone extended a foot to try and trip him. The perpetrator had a nasty, annoying grin on his face, mirrored by everyone at his table as they all stared at Naruto and Regina. The former stopped before he could trip. A quick glance at the man's necklace made it clear that he was an iron plate. Naruto then swiftly looked around and saw that no one made a move to step in. They all just watched, even the innkeeper, all of them waiting to see how this exchange played out. "That's real cute," Naruto chirped, giving the man a flat grin. "Do you do that to every random stranger you come across, or might just SPCIAL?" He would have said something more scathing, but didn't want to escalate the situation too much. The iron plate scoffed. "Maybe you are," he said, standing up to loom over the little girl before him. "Them some high-end magic items you got. Did your daddy buy 'em for you?" He reached out to grab the staff, a hungry gleam in his eyes. The response he got came in but a single word. Fling. Then, with a wave of Naruto's hand, the man was sent into a nearby wall, before comically bouncing off and around the tavern like a pinball. He eventually came to a stop at the disguised Yako's feet, landing flat on his face, and giving the ground a big ol' hug. By some miracle, the only thing broken in the process was the Iron Rank's pride. "I am so sorry," Naruto said sheepishly. "That was far more spectacular than I intended." "Funny as, though," agreed Naruto thought, not telling that voice in his head to shut up for once. "Don't make a habit of it," the innkeeper grunted, before glaring at the man's comrades, silently warning them not to with the girl any further. Regina, meanwhile, giggled, curiously poking the prone adventurer, and drawing a groan from him. "Oh, wow, he survived," she commented, mildly impressed. "2 BAD. There was no need to take it that far, Naruto giggled. He's just a punk who needed to be taught how not to treat a lady is all. Now, let's go rest for a bit. Right behind YA. Princess, the innkeeper called out, catching Naruto's attention. He reached into his pocket and handed the disguised man his money back. You stays on the house for that one. Much APPRECIATED, Naruto chirped. Clearly, he'd earned some manner of respect in the process, so it was only appropriate to show his own in return. You look like the type who can handle herself, the innkeeper said with a shrug. Just don't cause me any trouble and we're good. The door to their room closed with a thud, and Naruto was quick to lock it, before casting a spell on it. Magic lock. The spell in question was a favorite among arcane tricksters. It would prevent anyone from picking the lock, and reinforce the door frame, making it harder to just kick in. Of course, someone could still take an axe to the door itself, but the noise would attract attention, theirs in particular. And any dumb enough to try that shit would die. Painfully. Setting those thoughts aside, he cast another spell for good measure, tapping his staff on the ground while he was at it. Private Sanctum. The shockwave seemed to ripple through the air from the point of impact, enveloping their room. This spell was a magic ward, keeping any sounds from escaping this room and protecting it from divination magic. These functions only worked one way, though, meaning they could still hear what was going on outside, and use divination magic of their own normally. Nodding in satisfaction, Naruto opened up the shutters to let some air and sunlight in before looking around. The room itself was very sparsely furnished, sporting only 2 crudely made beds, just as many chests for their belongings, and a rickety end table. Fortunately for them, they had a window to look out of. And a half-used candle on the table to light up the room, but that was it. Damn, this place looks like shit, Opusargina muttered. Now, Naruto told her, don't be too harsh, we are noobs, after all, so it makes sense that we're not living like royalty quite yet. He fiddled with the new necklace thoughtfully. The small copper plate was much like a set of dog tags donned by soldiers around the world to denote one's rank. 9. The biggest difference was that they did so by being made from one of 8 different metals. Copper, iron, silver, gold, platinum, mithril, orichalcum, and adamantite. The further down the list, the more valuable the metal. The more valuable the metal, the higher the rank as one would expect. If you say so, the battle-maid muttered, a pout marring her pretty face. She looked around with a look of distaste. Her lord deserved so much better than this shit room. Naruto chuckled warmly, reaching up and standing on his toes to pat her on the head. The act made that pout go away in an instant. We wouldn't be stuck like this forever, he assured. Just tough it out and we'll climb up the social ladder soon enough. That was why they were here, after all. Naruto opted to head out and pose as an adventurer, so as to gather information on others of this profession. They were reputed to be the strongest people in the world, after all. Also, given what quests one would find in an MMO, even before VR was a thing, a player from Yggdrasil would likely be drawn to said profession because of its familiarity. If any others did exist in this world, the Adventurers Guild was a good place to look for them. But, at the same time, many of them would likely support the slain theocracy. The vast, overwhelming majority of players were humanoid, as they were afforded a lot more freedom than demihumans and heteromorphs, at least as far as pure mechanics were concerned. Also, while elves were more popular, humans tended to crawl out of the woodwork, and were thus the second biggest chunk of the player base by a ridiculous margin. That said, in the words of those from said nation, the slain theocracy fought tooth and nail to ensure that humanity would prosper. Unlike his own world, people were not at the top of the food chain here. Hell, they weren't even in the top 10. In fact, among the sapient species, they were the weakest, only making up for their shortcomings in intelligence and cooperation. And their birth rates. Even elves paled in comparison, according to the theocracy, though he wasn't sure yet if they were just biased in that regard. Said nation was very humanocentric, after all, even frowning upon other humanoid races. Regardless, even in the realm of intelligence and cooperation, humans were not always on top. Many other races were both more powerful and had more advanced civilizations than humanity. But those civilizations apparently found themselves at odds with a group called the 8 Kings of Avarice, 500 years ago. Humanity was among the very few survivors of that conflict. So, yeah, given that backstory, Naruto had no doubt that the vast, overwhelming majority of human players would side with the slain theocracy if anyone, and they accounted for roughly 1/3 of Yggdrasil's player base, if he wasn't mistaken. Opusargina, oblivious to his reasoning, sighed and relented with a nod. As you wish, Lord Kurama. Try not to call me that while we're in disguise, Naruto told her. The walls have ears, as they say, and private sanctum's not a perfect defense. It can be countered like anything else. Alright, sorry, she replied, looking a bit sheepish. It's fine, the disguised kitsune assured. That being said, we'll be returning to the guild tomorrow to see what kind of work we can get. Sounds like a plan, Opusargina chirped. Naruto nodded with a smile, before closing the window and casting yet another spell. Dancing lights. 8 illusory lanterns appeared in the room, granting them an effectively free light source. It still cost MP, but only a small amount that would undoubtedly be replenished long before he found himself needing it. Leaning his staff against the bed, Naruto extracted the magic satchel from his belt and plopped it on the bed, before starting to strip and get ready for bed. Interestingly, the robe didn't revert to its original form when he shed it, and neither did the boots and trousers, as he'd noticed when they were traveling here with the caravan. Pushing those thoughts aside, he laid them on the bed. Clean. Then, with a wave of his hand, the clothing in bed were all enveloped with a golden ore, as his magic got to work doing precisely what the incantation's name implied. Once that was done, he put all of his gear into the satchel, his staff sinking into said bag, as though it were passing through nothing but air. Then, putting his underwear back on, he fished out a nightshirt from his satchel, put it on, and went to bed, all the while doing his damnedest not to look at the battle-maid as she did the same, lest he be tempted to drop his transformation and mount her. Surely, she'd be willing, though. Shut up. Speaking of temptation, though, he found himself staring at many a young maiden along the way, and it was hard to contain himself when they got too close, so he should try to avoid them, too. But, still the feel of their warmth, their cries of pain and unwanted pleasure, they'd be so delicious he could get away with it once or twice, right? Shut up. But he wanted to so badly. I said shut up. Needless to say, this might very well have been a terrible idea. Harunoka's Ashi blinked in confusion when he found himself still in the game. Well, that doesn't seem right, he said. Then, what he heard gave him pause. Usually, when he spoke English, he'd hear his own voice, and Yggdrasil would filter it into a more appropriate one for his character. But now what Kizashi heard when he spoke was much girlier. Then, he noticed that the bed he sat on was softer and comfier, more real, for lack of a better way to put it. He reached up and touched his face and actually felt it. Granted, Kizashi could feel something akin to this before, but it was more artificial, less convincing. He could actually feel and smell the leather, now. He looked down and saw that he was still a chick if those chocolate tits were anything to go by. Kizashi reached down to be sure. Yup, that was definitely missing. He reached up, panic gripping him as he yanked down the bra. Kizashi could practically hear the cartoonish boing when those mighty knockers he'd given the Buki bounced out enticingly. Yup. Those were tits, those were definitely tits. Reaching up once more, he grabbed them and gave those fun bags an experimental squeeze, and then, the blood-curdling scream that followed could literally be heard throughout the nearest town, nearly half a mile away. Come next morning, Naruto stirred and forced himself up with a grunt. Damn, this bed was uncomfortable. Maybe going up a rank or two as soon as possible wouldn't be such a bad idea. Rolling over, he spied the undressed form of Regina. Apparently, she both slept in the buff, and had a habit of tossing her sheets all over the place, much to Naruto's dismay, as it left her very enticing form on full display. That nicely toned body of hers was so wide the way her red hair fell over her form, not at all hiding, but pronouncing her curves. It wouldn't hurt to reward her for putting up with this shitty room, right? Naruto tore his gaze away from her before he could be tempted to join the werewolf maid. He then turned bright red upon feeling a warm, very foreign sensation in his loins. Was this what it feels like for a woman to be aroused? It was so strange to him but not unpleasant. Pushing those thoughts aside, he pushed himself out of bed and got ready for the day. It only took a few moments to get dressed, though he couldn't help but blush at the sight of those tits, the nipples now as hard as rocks as he wrestled with his urges. But he managed, and soon enough, he was ready to head on out. Regina, he said, shaking her by her shoulder, doing his hardest to look at her face and not anywhere else. PSSD. Regina, it's time to get up. You 5 more minutes, the battle-maid moaned, turning away from him. Naruto's eyes trailed down her back until they reached the crack of her shapely ass. Shaking his head after a long moment of staring, totally unaware he'd started licking his lips, disguised Yako gave it a rest. He was sure she'd wake up soon enough on her own. A small grin stretched his cheeks. Maybe he should go into the town on his own. He was sure Regina would freak as she woke up and Lord Kurama was gone. It was certainly tempting, but he only had one key. If someone came in and saw those ears, it would raise some unwanted questions. He sighed and then, snack. Poor Regina nearly jumped out of her skin when Naruto spanked her, jolting awake and falling out of her bed. Naruto did his best to keep a straight face, having enjoyed that reaction far more than he should have. Time to get up, he said. Alright. And with that, Regina scrambled to her feet. It took her a scant moment to realize she was naked, and that her lord, in his female guise, was eyeing her up and down. Feeling heat rise to her face, she quickly reached for the satchel that contained her clothes. Oh, I like the view, Naruto said teasingly. The battle-maid blushed harder and giggled, legitimately flattered, though still a bit embarrassed. Want me to stay like this, then, laddie? Something flashed behind Naruto's eyes. Don't tempt me, he breathed out, turning away from her. The two of them shared an awkward laugh, more half-hearted on Naruto's part, and soon enough, they headed out. The first thing Kushina and Regina saw upon entering the guild hall was a large counter, manned by 3 receptionists. To one side was a quest board and a few dozen adventurers were milling about. Heading to the mission board, he decided to take a look. There was only one problem. I still can't read, Naruto thought in dismay. He glanced at Regina and saw that she seemed to be in the same boat as him. 1. Yet. he thought, pulling down the nearest quest to him and heading to the receptionist, Regina right on his heels. "We'd like to take this one," he said. The receptionist stared at him and gave him an apologetic smile. "Sorry, but that one's restricted to mithril or higher." "Oh, my apologies," Naruto replied, playing it off as an honest mistake. "I'm new here, so I have no idea what I'm doing quite yet. Would you mind helping us find a mission that's more appropriate for our level?" "It's fine," the receptionist giggled, finding it rather endearing. "It happens more often than you'd believe." "Yeah, I could see why," Naruto replied, a sheepish but friendly grin spreading across his face. Then, the receptionist hummed thoughtfully. Her eyes skimmed over the crowd. "You know, there's a group looking for more members at the moment," she said. "They're silver plates, but they have a reputation for helping newcomers." "Really?" Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. Then he smiled brightly. "That would be great. I'll call them over, then," the receptionist chirped. "So, we heard you ladies needed some help settling in," a man said as he approached their table Kushina and Regina were waiting at. Naruto eyed him and his companions discreetly. "Yep. That's us." Regina chirped, grinning widely at them. "Yeah, what she said." Naruto nodded, smiling at them pleasantly. "I'm Peter Mock," he said, smiling back. The young man had blonde hair and blue eyes, which seemed to be very common in Riest styles, and appeared to be a warrior. He then gestured to another man in the group. "This is our ranger, Volv." The man in question was garbed in leather armor, and appeared to be the more nimble type as one would expect from such a role. He smiled, nodding to them, and then his gaze landed on Naruto. When it did, his smile widened and his cheeks started turning red. "Oh, no," Naruto thought, expertly hiding his dismay. "Not another one." He smiled politely at the ranger and Lucker quite visibly took it the wrong way. "Shit. Too. Looks like you two will get along quite nicely," Peter commented with a chuckle. Then, he continued with the introductions. "That right there is Ninya, the spellcaster." "Pleased to meet you," Ninya said. She was probably the youngest in their group, looking very boyish, but Naruto could literally smell that this one was actually a girl. She had brown hair, cropped short, and donned a leather robe. The smile she donned was like a mask, but not entirely fake. Then, she turned to the leader of their group. "But Peter," she protested, looking flustered, "could you not use that embarrassing nickname?" "Nickname?" Naruto asked, looking curious. "He's a talent holder," Peter told him, "and a genius magic caster." The pronoun used caught Naruto's attention. Was she posing as a guy? Or a tranny, perhaps? It was hard to say, but the disguised Yako decided to file that away for later. Though, Naruto looked very interested to hear that. After making those little shits from the sunlight scripture spill their guts literally, and then stitching them back up and making them do it again several more times, they had quite a lot to say about this new world, and the many things it had that did not exist in Yggdrasil. As it turned out, about 1 in 200 people were born with a talent of some kind. These had varying effects and levels of potency. The high-ranking prisoner they'd captured, for example, could predict the weather with 70% accuracy, just by looking at the sky, while one of the many they killed had the ability to bolster any summoned monsters in the area. These talents couldn't be chosen or changed in any way, though. To make matters worse, many talent holders never had the chance to realize that they had one, since they often had to be identified the hard way. "It's just that I have a talent that benefits my field is all," Ninyu muttered, looking embarrassed. Deciding to show the girls some mercy before they could get even more off topic, Naruto looked at the last man in their group. "So, who's the big guy?" Peter perked up, his train of thought having been brought to a screeching halt as he realized that he'd been distracted. "Oh, right," the warrior said, looking sheepish. "That's our druid, Dying Woodwonder. He uses nature and healing magic. He's also pretty well versed in herbal lore and medicine." "Pleased to meet you," Dying greeted. He was the largest in their group, both tall and burly, with long, golden hair and a full beard. The smell of a freshly mowed lawn appeared to come from the pouch on his belt. Together, Peter added, "We are the Swords of Darkness." Naruto smiled fondly at that, the edgy-ass name making him think of Albert. Then, he stood up and did a small curtsy. "Nice to meet you all. I'm Kushina Uzumaki, a magic caster who specializes in pyromancy and illusions. You can call me Kushina. And this is my friend Regina, a cleric who focuses on healing magic." Regina threw her arm over Naruto's shoulders and waved at them with the other. "Sup?" Of course, the Radiant's bosom was pressed up against her lord's face in the process, causing him to blush. Peter offered a curt nod, before addressing Naruto once more. "So you're not from around here, I take it?" He shook his head after prying himself from Regina's chest. "No. We decided to go explore the world, but we don't really know much besides what we've heard back home." The man nodded again, seemingly in thought. "Well, we'd be happy to help. We were just getting ready to head out and deal with a small mob of goblins harassing travelers near the Great Forest of Top." Naruto perked up at the name. "Oh, I have a friend in Karn Village," he said. "They're not causing trouble around there, are they?" "Shouldn't be," Peter assured. "Goblins know better than to attack a human settlement and piss off the kingdom. They're more to the northeast, anyway. It's fairly safe and the mission should be easy, perfect for testing the waters." "You in?" Naruto and Regina shared a knowing look. "Yes." Boom. A band of goblins reeled from the blast, about a week later. Naruto, thrilled at the gawking look sent his way, cutely tilted his head, placing a finger on his lower lip. It had an immediate effect on everyone, even the two real females. Lupasergina flushed, while Ninya seemed just a little annoyed at him for outshining her like that. Was that too much? Truth be told, he was holding way at the back so as not to arouse suspicion. Seeing how most magic casters were only able to use third-tier magic at the very most, so he stuck to first-tier spells. Except Naruto used his knowledge of basic chemistry to bolster their effect. The first thing he did was cast grease, creating a puddle of slick flammable liquid before the horde of goblins, halting their charge, and then casting fireball to ignite it. Then, to send the survivors a little message, he cast create water upon the grease fire, which is the exact result that one would expect. Peter chuckled and shook his head. No, just unexpected. That was pretty clever for a fresh adventurer. You took almost half him out before I had the chance to engage. Naruto rubbed the back of his head, chuckling sheepishly. Sorry. Sorry. That was great. Dain boasted, hoisting his weapon over his shoulder with a friendly smile. I'm sure you'll rise to gold plate in no time with talent like that, Kushina. Naruto ducked his head bashfully to keep them from seeing the shit-eating grin on his face. Playing these chumps for fools was way too much fun. Thanks, he muttered, doing his best to sound embarrassed. Right, Peter said, taking a stance in front of Naruto. Let's mop up the rest before they reorganize. But, despite Naruto's explosion scaring the survivors shitless, this fight wasn't over yet, as the little green men they'd been sent to kill steeled themselves and readied for battle. To make matters worse, this mission had the unforeseen complication of several ogres joining the fray. The burly, yellow-skinned creatures stood well over 10 feet tall, their hunchbacks covered in a layer of brown fur, and the both of them wielded small, uprooted trees as clubs. They too were startled by the fire, but when the goblins charged, so too did they. Peter roared, meeting the horde with sword and board, while Naruto, Ninya and Lucker provided ranged support. Dain, meanwhile, pinned down a few of the big boys with some crowd control, dozens of vines sprouting out of the ground to halt the ogres. Finally, Lupasergina cast some buff spells on their meat shield, mostly to keep him alive, while he hacked away at the little buggers. Of course, the goblins recognized Naruto as the biggest threat, sending a volley of arrows his way. Look out, Kushina. Lucker called out, only to see said mage expertly evading each and every last one of them. Unfortunately, this had the side effect of distracting her teammates, and distracted is not something one wanted to be in a combat situation. As such, a trio of goblins slipped past Peter and Dain, gunning for the slippery mage. One of them was skewered by Lupasergina, and when another got too close to Naruto, muscle memory kicked in. Backpedaling a bit, the pseudo-blonde instinctively whacked the little heir with his staff, and just as he was about to kick himself for the wasted effort, splat. Naruto found himself covered in goblin, the impact reducing much of his would-be assailant to a fine mist. A third goblin, frozen in shock, was also speared. The pointy bit of Lupasergina's staff made quick work of him, finding home in his left eye socket. Unfortunately, that wasn't all they had to deal with, as one of the ogres also got around Peter, and charged at the disguised kitsune, but he practically danced around the beast. Mirror image. Naruto called out, and with that, there were over a dozen cute blondes running about, confusing the ogre as he tried to swing at them. Nearly every time, the makeshift club missed its mark, and the one time it did manage to hit the ogre's target faded away. Ninya was visibly surprised, recognizing that spell as a second-tier illusion. Clearly, Kushina was more powerful than she let on. Pushing that thought aside for later, she cast a spell of her own. Magic arrow. A flash of gold emanated from the tip of her staff before launching itself at the beast and hitting it right in the eye. The ogre roared and charged at Ninya, more pissed off than hurt. Lupasergina then took up a position in front of the brunette, her spear-like staff ready to impale the ogre, while Naruto clicked his tongue in annoyance, and decided to take this up a notch. Scorching ray. A red beam shot forth from his staff, hitting the ogre in the back and cutting through him like a hot knife through butter. Ninya, meanwhile, just stared, the brunette's eyes nearly popping out of her skull, as the ogre fell to the ground in a boneless heap. That too was a second-tier spell, but even a mage who could use that level of magic had no damn business taking an ogre down in one shot, even if it was wounded. Looks like the cat's out of the bag, the real Naruto giggled, looking sheepish. I'm actually a third tier, but most of my attack spells are first and second. Then, he saw another ogre coming his way and cast another spell to prove it. Might as well show you what I'm really capable of, fly. And just like that, he and his illusory clones took to the air, swirling about and swapping positions with each other to confuse the goblins with bows. Scorching ray. And yet again, the ogre she had bit the dust, removing all doubt that he could one-shot them, and crushing two goblins to death as it hit the ground. Then, another one died and another one, and another one. It was then that the swords of darkness as a whole were at a loss for words. To think that a girl so young would be capable of something like this. This girl, Peter muttered. Is she for real? Uckard asked, looking amazed, jealous, and aroused. She has to be platinum level to pull that off. At least. Naruto had to hide his amusement at that. Truth be told, if he wanted to, he'd have ended this fight before it even started with a single explosion, but that would have clearly been too much. Hell, judging by their reactions right now, these warriors would probably all die of a collective heart attack if he did that. Speaking of reactions, after seeing 5 of the 7 ogres go down so quickly, in addition to that initial explosion, the small horde knew damn well that they were way out of their league. In a frenzied panic, they all turned tail and ran. "Don't let them escape," Peter called out. "Seriously, 3rd tier, at 14. Naruto sat on his ankles, looking incredibly sheepish as Peter stared at him like he was capable of taking over the world or some shit. After the dust had cleared, the corpses were looted, and that fire was put out before it could become a problem. Naruto, Lapus Regina, and the Swords of Darkness set up camp a little farther south. To be fair, Lapus Regina chimed in, she had a hell of a teacher. Still, though, Ninja countered, a jealous pout on her face, most people can't use 3rd tier magic until their mid-20s at least, if at all. "Yes, I have a talent," Naruto said with a chuckle. "Not sure if it's a talent or not, but I sure as hell have a knack for magic. Been good at it from the start." It was the best excuse he could come up with on the fly. He honestly wanted to avoid shit like this, but at the same time, that ogre could have potentially killed Ninja if he hadn't done something about it, and her group would have been dealing with threats on both sides soon after. Needless to say, getting a full team of silver plates killed was not something Naruto wanted in his resume. While he was confident in Lapus Regina's abilities, that still wasn't a risk he wanted to take more because of her hatred towards humans than anything. He also knew himself more than well enough to be aware of his limits. That said, Naruto quickly realized that holding back enough to pass himself off as a 1st or 2nd tier caster would be too difficult in the long run, so he decided to rip the band-aid off right then and there. "I'm just as confused as you guys are about the goblin I splattered, though, couldn't tell you how I pulled that one off." Of course, one potential explanation came to mind, which he'd have to test later, but they didn't need to know about that. "Sounds awfully familiar," Diane commented after a moment of thought. "She's a faith-based caster, but the leader of Blue Rose is capable of 5th tier magic. They say she could wield 3rd tier magic around your age, too." "Blue Rose?" Naruto asked, looking interested. He'd heard of them, too, but his information on that group was quite limited. Was that chick with the black sword a player, perhaps? It certainly sounded like a possibility. "Another adventurer group," Peter said. "They live in the royal capital and are friends with Princess Runner." Naruto filed that little nugget away for later. Apparently, he would be taking Gazif up on that offer after all. "To think we met a copper plate with that kin to power," Lucker chimed in. "And a cute one at that, it's kin to HOT. Naruto cleared his throat, averting his gaze, while a certain Reddit giggled. Truth be told, Lapus Regina found his situation far more amusing than she should. But then, she took it upon herself to help him out, leaning in closer to whisper into his ear. "If you ever need to, vent," she said, "feel free to use me all you want." Naruto's eyes went wide and he turned bright red, reduced to a sputtering mess by the offer, much to the group's collective amusement, all of them, assuming that Regina was giving her friend some advice, as it were. "As flattering as this conversation has been," Naruto chirped, deciding to change the subject before shit got way out of hand. "If you all don't mind, I'd like to check on that friend in Karn Village on our way back." "That seems fine," Diane commented. "It's not too far out of our way, anyway, and we'd be able to stay there for one night. Also," Naruto added, "Karn Village is in the Wise King's territory, so it should be a relatively safe path, at least from monsters." But then, Lucrid abruptly slunk right next to Naruto and slipped an arm over his shoulders, drawing a squawk from him. "Oh, don't worry your pretty head, my lovely KSHINA, nothing can get past my senses. If any monsters try to come anywhere near you, I'll spot them from a mile away." The disguised Yauko twitched violently as this man immediately started to test his patience and self-control. "I'ma kill him. Juice a teensy bit." "Sounds good to me," Peter announced. "We'll stay here for the night and start heading there in the morning." In the dead of night, a headed figure snuck into the cemetery of R-rantel. The person in question was a woman around 20 or so with short golden locks. Her hooded jet black cape reached down to her hips, and she sported long stockings, mismatched sabatons, and naught but a pair of black panties under her fold. Her pretty face sported the look of a hungry kitten as she practically glided across the ground, deftly avoiding the magical illumination of the crypt as she seemingly moved like a ghost. "Amichiari," the girl's tone was a playful one, and that announcement was the only sound she'd made in the past hour. Then, she pushed the doors of the mausoleum open and entered. All of the slabs therein were empty, nary a sign of the dead or their belongings in sight. "I'm coming in," the girl sang, approaching an inconspicuous carving in the wall. She pressed her hand against it. The carving moved inwards, and there was a click followed by the sound of grinding stone. A path opened up, a staircase leading downwards made visible, and she descended. The staircase curved halfway and led to what looked like an underground cave with several tunnels leading out. Though the floor and walls were of earth and mud, it looked man-made. The air was also quite fresh down here, either by magic or ventilation. She neither knew nor cared. This place was not part of the cemetery, despite its location, but rather something far more sinister. Menacing tapestries lined the walls. The whole cave was illuminated by red candles made from human blood, and the reek of low-tier undead came from the tunnels, thoroughly marking this cave as the headquarters of Zuranin, an evil organization of mages responsible for many a tragedy within the kingdom. The girl's attention was quickly drawn to someone who entered through one of the tunnels. He was a scrawny little shit, his eyes sunken in. His complexion was pale as a corpse, and the man didn't have a single hair on his head. "Hello, Khshi." Kaji Albedo frowned deeply at the girl's playful greeting, but didn't dare say something that would come off as rude or smortis-like. He knew what type of woman she was. An excuse was all she needed, and a lot of times she didn't need one at all, but woe be upon those foolish enough to give her such a thing. "Clementine," he greeted back with a stiff nod. "You're not here to cause trouble, are you? I've had enough of that for one day already." And the now named Clementine giggled, pulling out something small that sparkled in the candlelight. "I'm just here to deliver this as ALL." It was a circlet made of silver chains, one that was to get her hands on, but she managed. Kaji couldn't contain his surprise. That was one of the treasures of the slain theocracy. "The crown of wisdom," the man muttered in breathless shock. "Yup, Clementine giggled again. "Found a cute girl wearing it for some reason. Looked so out of place on her head, so I took it off, and then she went utterly mad. She curled up into a ball and pissed and shat herself while gibbering like a loon." The girl busted a gut, laughing her ass off at the memory. It went unsaid that the cute girl in question was the Myco Princess, a girl at the center of the slain theocracy's rituals. As a former member of the Black Scripture, Clementine knew full well what she had done, but she didn't give a shit. "Surely this wouldn't come free," Kaji said, eyeballing her cautiously. "What do you want?" "Well, you see," Clementine chirped. "I might have found a guy who can wear it. I mean, there's a pretty outstanding talent holder in town, N.O. I've heard the rumors, so you have reason to believe this kid could do it, huh? So why are you coming to me? I'm sure you could handle kidnapping one person. Just want you to wreak a little havoc on my way out is all. Make my job easier, Y'Know. A distraction, then." Clementine grinned at him. "Yup, I'll even help you with your ritual while I'm at IT. Truth be told, the girl just wanted to sow as much chaos as she could. His help was entirely unnecessary, but the gig would be so much more boring without it." Kaji returned the smile with an evil one of his own. "Very well, I shall gladly aid you, then." 2 days after setting out to Karn village, the group was closing in on their destination, all the while chatting it up amongst themselves, and getting to know each other a bit more. Naruto in particular was having a rather nice conversation with Ninya, thankful that Peter got Lucker to back off for the time being. "Seriously, 35 spells?" Naruto asked, legitimately impressed. "That's amazing. That may have been just a bit hyperbolic, especially coming from him, but the girl was certainly powerful for someone from this world, especially given her age." "Why, you're too kind," Ninya said shyly, blushing hard and averting her gaze. That was so adorable. It took the disguised kitsune all of his might to keep himself from hugging the girl. "I call it as I see it," he said. "With your talents I can see you becoming a well-known adventurer in the near future." And he genuinely meant it as well. She and this small band of adventurers were on their way to becoming legends in their own right. "Ninya's always been the strongest of the group," Peter commented fondly. "He's just too modest for his own good." "Indeed," Dain chimed in. "At this rate, he'll be a gold plate in no time." "And Ms. Kashina's far more impressive, though," Ninya countered, doing her best to misdirect their attention before she was overwhelmed. "That doesn't mean you won't get there eventually," Naruto told her with a chuckle. "Even I had to start from the bottom." It took every ounce of Upasarjina's self-control not to laugh at how absurd the notion of these whelps catching up to her Lord Kurama was. Still, though, Lucker chimed in, slipping in and pulling the umpteenth undignified squawk from Naruto, by pulling the cute blonde into a one-armed hug. "I mean, to kill so many ogres that quickly you're on your way to the very top with talent like that, my lovely Kshina." Thanks," Naruto muttered awkwardly, just taking the compliment. Was this karma? As an actual karma for getting the Kasha boy infatuated with a woman who never existed? A higher power he somehow pissed off? Just bad luck, perhaps. Whatever it was, he wanted to kill it and this her. Of course, Upasarjina had discreetly offered to get rid of Lucker for him many times, in fact. But as tempting as that was, it seemed like a bad idea to say the least. Now, Peter reprimanded, giving Naruto's tormentor a light whack on the head. "Say alert, you, we can't have our ranger letting himself get distracted, you know. Spoil sport, Lucker tease," before backing off and returning to his position in the rear. Naruto let out a sigh of relief. If this kept up, the man had no idea how long he could maintain this cover of his. Upasarjina and the girl were tempting his inner demons enough with their presence alone, and that guy trying to get into his pants wasn't helping. He looked into the distance and saw that the forest was coming to an end. The path they were taking also started to turn. If he wasn't mistaken, their destination should be around that corner. "Looks like we're getting close," Naruto said. That was good. He could finally relax and check on weight. The rustic little shire was in the distance, looking rather quaint and peaceful, but Naruto didn't remember that fence. Apparently, a large wooden barrier had been erected in his absence. Then again, they were attacked recently, likely still recovering from having their population cut in half, so it was pretty safe to assume that the new chief had this defense put in place as a deterrent. Something wrong? Peter asked. Naruto shrugged. The fence wasn't there before is all, he said. I was a little surprised to see it. Did something happen? Lucard asked. A while back, Naruto replied. Makes sense that they'd be more cautious now as a result, though. Guess they put it up while I was in R-rantel. Upon giving it a second look, the fence appeared to be made of logs, which meant that it was at least somewhat resistant to being cut down. He could also see small gaps in between, so anyone with a bow could potentially take a shot at their attackers from relative safety. It was crude, but not a terrible defense. But then, Ninyu cut in, looking troubled. I don't know, her frown deepened as they drew closer. Maybe I'm looking into it a bit too much, but I grew up in a village like this one, so I know what it's like. That said, there are two things that look kinda suspicious. The fields haven't been tilled yet, despite the time of year, and they've already harvested some wheat. They all looked in the direction she was pointing, and saw that some of it had indeed been taken in prematurely. It's strange, Ninyu muttered. Maybe something happened. I'll scout ahead using fly and invisibility, Naruto announced. I'll let you know if I see anything fishy with the message. Be careful, Lucard said hastily. The disguised Yako nodded politely, before turning his attention to the village. Fly. Invisibility. With the first spell, his lithe frame briefly flickered with green aura, and with the second, he seemed to fade away. Then, he took flight, the resulting whoosh being the only sound they heard afterwards. As Upasarjina and the Swords of Darkness continued on their way, Naruto flew close and saw nothing amiss, at least in terms of the villagers' movements. That was good. Then again he thought, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing silent magic. Detect magic. Naruto carefully slipped in closer, getting into range to see if he could sense any spells or magical effects in the area. He came up negative and was just about to leave when something caught his attention. Slipping closer for a better look, Naruto was surprised by what he saw. Goblins. They were hiding in the wheat near the fence. These ones were different, though. The ones they killed before were scrawnier and far less intelligent, but these ones they were large for their species, more robust, and carried themselves like trained soldiers, if that archer approaching the others was anything to go by. 3. Any sign of the one who went invisible? No sir. Dinah did say she used 2 spells. She was too far away for me to say for sure, but it seemed to be flight magic. She could be anywhere. Yep, these guys were definitely more organized and a hell of a lot smarter. They look like goblins from Yggdrasil, Naruto thought. Clearly, they were summoned by one of those horns. Does that mean that creatures summoned by items are permanent? That was something he'd have to look into later. He did still have that crystal, after all in either case, though, something clearly happened while he wasn't looking if Henry ended up using one of those horns. Well, best see what I can do to establish peaceful contact, Naruto thought. Clearly, they think we might be hostile, so I'd better clear things up with them. That thought in mind, Naruto floated down so that he was in front of the goblins, sat down, and dropped the invisibility spell. Predictably, they were all on guard in an instant, the leader and 2 archers popping out like daisies, poised to strike if he tried anything. Sorry if I scared you, he said. Something looked off about the fields being left unattended, so I scouted ahead to make sure nothing was wrong. Kushina. Upasarjina called out, running to Naruto's side, the Swords of Darkness in tow. He raised his hand and gestured for her to stand down. They're just trying to protect the village is all, he said. You're kidding, right? Peter asked. He'd never heard of goblins doing such thing. Granted, they also looked a little weird, but still. I mean, they jumped out to threaten me when I appeared too close, Naruto pointed out with a shrug. Also, the people inside are just fine, despite one of the gates being wide open, and a few more of them being in the village itself. It's the only logical conclusion I can come up with. Literally everyone present was unnerved by how nonchalant he was being, despite the sword at his throat. I figured Ms. Emmett would need these guys' help eventually, Naruto explained. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. The goblins all perked up at the name. Clearly they knew the woman Naruto mentioned. The Swords of Darkness, meanwhile, only had even more questions. Tell Ms. Emmett that a friend of Kurama wants to speak with her in private, the Yoko chirped, flashing them a foxy grin. She'll know who I'm talking about. Try anything funny and I will kill you, the leader warned. Upasarjina looked very displeased to hear that, but calmed her tits when Naruto raised his hand once more, gesturing for her to back down. So, she did for now. A flustered panting Henry soon arrived, bolting the hell over here the instant she heard that name. After catching her breath, she looked at the group in question, and saw a young girl, just barely into adulthood, sitting in front of the gate with Jujum's sword at her throat. She looked like a magic caster from what Henry could tell, and a red-haired woman in black and white was glaring daggers at the goblin in question. There were 4 others with them, all apparently men. Judging by their necklaces, these people were all adventurers. They almost never visited this area, but given how close they were to R-rantel, it wasn't unheard of for such a party to stop by and rest every once in a blue moon. As someone wanted to talk to me? Henry asked. HLLO Naruto chirped, giving the actual blonde a friendly wave. Taking that as her answer, Henry nodded. Alright, come with me, then. Gyujin, the leader of Enri's goblin troop, then sheathed his sword and backed off from Naruto, allowing him to stand up, before calling out to a couple of his comrades. Dino, Paipo, he said, let's go with. Everyone else, keep an eye on them. The lone female goblin and a burly male with the mohawk scampered to his side and they opened the gate. But then, the Reddit in Naruto's party looked like she was about to protest. The Yako, however, nipped that in the bud. It's fine, Regina, he assured. This'll only take a few minutes. With that, the three goblins escorted him and Enri to a nearby building where they could have some privacy. Once they were inside and the door was locked, Naruto tapped his staff. Private sanctum. The goblins all flinched, two of them drawing their swords. Goose, making sure this conversation stays private, he chirped. Gyujin looked to the female goblin, and she nodded. It's an anti-scrying spell, she explained. Wanted to make sure that no one finds out that I'm posing as an adventurer at least for now, Naruto added. Posing? Gyujin asked, looking suspicious. Naruto grabbed onto his robe with the hand holding his staff, and with a whoosh, the whole outfit was replaced with his divine class gear, while he himself took on his true form minus the vulpine traits. Lord Kurama, Enri gasped. The LLO, Naruto chirped. Gyujin looked to the female goblin once more. An illusion. No, she shook her head. Actual shapeshifting. So the rumors are true, the third goblin muttered. Then, he furrowed his brow in confusion. But isn't the hero of Karn village named Ains? This guy fit the description, but Kurama's my real name, Naruto said. Aside from you three, Enri, her sister, and that Reddit in my party, are the only ones in the area who know it for now. Why yeah, Enri chimed in, before addressing Naruto. That aside, our new chief wanted to ease the villagers into the idea that they were saved by a demi-human, she said. Please feel free to take on your true form if that's more comfortable. A demi-human, huh? Naruto smiled in amusement. Well, kitsune did look close enough to beastmen in particular when donning their humanoid form, even those of the malevolent variety, so it's easy to see how they came to that conclusion. And so, he took on his true form for what felt like the first time in eons, before stretching his tails with a grunt, followed by a sigh of relief. After being in disguise for so long, he said, you have no idea how refreshing this is. And he giggled at that, before addressing the goblins. It's okay, you guys, he's friendly. The goblins looked at her oddly, but laid down their arms. They were still suspicious of the apparent beastmen, but kept that to themselves. Then, the blonde returned her attention to Naruto. So, what brings you here? I wanted to check on you, he replied. Did something happen? Another troop of men from the Baharth Empire, Enri sighed. Ah, shit, Naruto growled, before sighing. Sorry I couldn't help you with that. Thought I killed them all. It's fine, she assured. I don't think anyone could have expected it to happen again so soon. They came about a few days after you left. The kitsune frowned. Meaning there was another party ravaging the countryside, he mused aloud. That wasn't nearly enough time for another troop to mobilize, cross the border and attack without some high-tier teleportation magic. Anyone of that caliber would have single-handedly wiped this village off the map, though, so a second troop was the most likely answer. 5. They apparently, yeah, Enri muttered. Then, she gave him a thankful bow. But you were a much bigger help than you think. When I used that horn and these goblins came to help, Karn village was saved again. Naruto smiled at that. I'll be sure to come by soon and leave someone here to help out, he said. Just in case. You don't have to, but I want to. The Reddit smiled at her. Can't have a cutie like you getting herself hurt, NOW. Poor Enri sputtered in embarrassment at that, turning bright red. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at her reaction if his life depended on it. I can assure you, it's fine. I'm happy to help. So how are you doing now that it's all blown over? Fairly, well, the blonde replied. Feeling a bit out of my element, though. How so? Well, the goblins are all loyal to me as I'm sure you can tell, and well, because of that I found myself becoming the captain of the watch of all things. That is so cute. Naruto let out another hearty chuckle. The thought of this poor, little thing being thrust into such an ill-fitting position was one hell of a guilty pleasure. Enri only blushed harder. That aside, though, I'm doing well enough. Getting used to it, thanks to Gyujin's encouragement. She gestured to the leader of the goblin troop. Naruto smiled at him and gave the goblin in question a respectful nod. Thanks for helping her out, he said. Sure, Gyujin didn't quite know how to respond to that, but accepted his gratitude nonetheless. So, how have you been? Enri asked. Could do without that ranger in my party constantly hitting on me, Naruto said with an exasperated sigh. Then, he smiled. That aside, it's been enlightening. I've been posing as an adventurer for a while, so I can explore and learn about this world more freely. Then, he gave her a sheepish grin. In the process, though, I learned that I can't read this country's language. That is adorable. The blonde giggled. Well, the villagers have been pestering me to learn how to read for some reason. Maybe we can do it together. Why did you have to put it like that? Naruto smiled, ignoring his raging boner as best he could. And he didn't seem to notice, much to his relief. Those words evoked the mental image of her back pressed against the wall, skirt lifted, with Naruto between Enri's spread legs, and holding her up while pounding the ever-loving out of the blonde. Hopefully, she didn't see the bolt starting to form. Sounds like a plan, he chirped. One more reason for Ainzul Gown to pay Karn Village another visit, eh? Thanks for watching.